Chapter 698. Mute ignored them and led Arbor and Lien straight into the village. There were over 100 families in the village. When they saw outsiders enter, they all came over to watch. Men and women, old and young, dressed strangely, their eyes revealing traces of ill intentions. Arbor expressionlessly swept his gaze over them and followed behind Mute with Lien for a while. Ahaha, my guests who have come from afar. Welcome. A deep and resounding laughter came from afar. A sturdy man was surrounded by many people and slowly walked towards Arbor's group. Village Chief. Village Chief. The rest of the people respectfully bowed to the village chief. This man was about 30 years old and had a rather tall stature. His bright and spirited eyes swept over Xiao Mu and Lien, and when he saw the two people's faces clearly, disbelief also flitted across his eyes. Such graceful and elegant people, they didn't look simple at all. How could they be so easily caught by Mute? Mute, these two people, where did you find them? Mute was silent and didn't make a sound. He only lowered his head and didn't say anything. Why aren't you saying anything? The man looked suspiciously at Mute, who had lowered his head. Usually, even though a Mute couldn't speak, he could at least make some gestures to explain what he was talking about. He. A clear laughter like a silver bell entered everyone's ears, closely followed by a fragrant wind. The woman who walked over quickly was about 27 or 28 years old. Her voluptuous figure was tightly wrapped in a thin red short skirt. She was dressed in an exotic attire, revealing two long white legs. Where did such a cute little girl come from? Come to big sister quickly. That woman twisted her snake-like waist and swept in front of Arbor like a whirlwind. She hooked her hand and was about to pull Arbor into her embrace. Prince Mo didn't say anything and kicked at the woman. What protective feelings for the fairer sex, there was no such thing. The kick was vicious and accurate, aiming straight for the woman's thigh. Xiao Mu had originally thought that the woman's leg would definitely break with a crack, but who would have expected that the woman's leg would be as soft as a noodle, as if it had been stripped of its bones, and it actually evaded Crown Prince Mo's kick. Stinky man. Go away. The woman's expression changed as she took 2 steps back. She hurriedly took out a handkerchief from her bosom and wiped it. Her thigh was not touched at all. Arbor. This was the first time she saw a woman who hated the Crown Prince so much. The Crown Prince's expression was also very ugly. He pulled his baby into his arms with one hand and raised his other hand to gently pat her back to comfort her. The big man looked at Lien and Arbor with even more confusion. Just as he was about to speak, he saw a short man who quickly jumped over and landed in front of them. Rabbit 3, what's the matter? The short man called Rabbit 3 grinned and said, Village Chief, Mother Zhen and the others are back. They said that they're going to have a barbecue feast tonight. Let everyone in the village get ready. Okay. Everyone cheered in unison, as if that barbecue feast was very interesting. Arbor's eyes flashed slightly and he secretly poked Little Snake with his finger. The little snake gave Mute an order, and Mute lowered his head, bringing the two of them back to his house. The village chief and the others were busy preparing for that barbecue feast and didn't make things difficult for them. Chapter 699. It could be seen that everyone had a long-lost excitement on their faces, which made Arbor somewhat curious. What barbecue feast? It made the entire village seem like it was New Year's in advance as everyone busied themselves. Because this barbecue feast would only be held at night, Arbor and Lien followed Mute back to his room. Upon returning to his room, Mute collapsed limply onto the ground, motionless. Little Snake's nether energy can only be controlled for so long. We have to be careful in our actions from now on. Mo Lien grasped Arbor's small hand and said, "This village is very strange." I took a look. Quite a few people here seem to be demonic cultivators. Especially that woman just now. Her entire body was very soft. If he didn't guess wrongly, she should have fused with some kind of snake bone, which caused her body to be abnormally soft. What in the world is this village where demonic cultivators congregate trying to do by hiding underground? Although proper mystic cultivators, or ordinary martial artists, were not willing to get close to people like demonic cultivators were no longer discriminated against ever since operation squads were established. On the contrary, many squads were very happy to take in demonic cultivators with special abilities and participate in missions together. Since everyone was slowly starting to try to accept demonic cultivators as a group, then why were these demonic cultivators still sneakily hiding underground, unwilling to show their faces under the sun? Say, do you think someone is deliberately raising these people underground? Arbor muttered softly, and the Crown Prince's brows knitted tightly. If there really was a mastermind behind the scenes, why would they raise such a large group of demonic cultivators underground near the Mo Kingdom capital? In that case, this question was really worth investigating. The two people did not go out. During this time, several people tried to knock on Mute's door, but the two people ignored them. Only when it was 10 minutes into the night did Mo Lien and Arbor open the door and follow the crowd's footsteps, surging toward the underground village's central gathering place. The two people mingled in the crowd, following behind unhurriedly. When they arrived at the gathering place, they saw a dense mass of heads, at least 1,000 people. There were actually more than 1,000 people hidden in this underground village. At least half of them were demonic cultivators, while the rest were mostly ordinary people with shackles on their legs and hands. Apart from the excitement on the faces of those demonic cultivators, most of the ordinary people had numb expressions on their faces. Their eyes were dull as they were urged forward by the demonic cultivators. They were like a group of slaves who would move forward or backward if their master wanted them to. Many benches were placed around the plaza. The group of demonic cultivators each led the slaves in their hands and sat down in an orderly manner. At a glance, the group of people had surrounded the assembly hall. Some of the demonic masters were leading a dozen or so slaves, while some were only leading a few. There were men and women, old and young among these slaves. All of them had tattered clothes and messy hair as they knelt at the feet of the demonic masters. "Quiet, all of you, quiet down." The village head raised his hand and stopped the crowd from talking. Everyone quieted down. That snake beauty from before swayed her slender waist as she walked forward with her clothes exposed. She stood next to the village head and laughed coquettishly. "The barbecue feast will now begin. Everyone can forget about everything and start partying." Everyone let out excited shrieks as they vigorously swung the long chains that were leading the slaves. Chapter 700. The sound of rolling wheels rolling on the ground came in their direction. Arbor and Mo Lien raised their eyes, only to see 3 enormous grills being pushed out. The so-called barbecue was 3 people skewered on the grills. 2 ordinary people with numb expressions stood on both sides of the grills, continuously flipping the skewered people on the grills. Arbor almost vomited when she saw it, her little head suddenly burying into the Crown Prince's embrace. Although the Crown Prince was also very nauseous, nothing could be seen on his face. His gaze was cold as he looked at this group of demons who were laughing maniacally. The 3 people were already beyond recognition. Blood dripped from their bodies, and the roasted fat sizzled. It was obvious that they had been barbecued for a long time and were already thoroughly dead. "Big brother, second brother, third brother." A mournful cry came from the foot of a demonic master in the front row. A slave led by that demonic master suddenly rushed forward, roaring angrily as he wanted to pounce on the 3 grills. A female demonic cultivator who was holding the chain suddenly pulled on the metal chain with a chuckle. After a series of clangs, the bald little fatty who had been calling for his brother was pulled to the ground with a bang. He smashed the ground with both his hands in anger and despair as he cried bitterly. Ah ha 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 ha. The female demonic master laughed enchantingly. She got up and tugged on the iron chain in her hand, dragging the bald brat to her side. Sharp spikes abruptly shot out from her 5 fingers, and she grabbed a piece of flesh from the brat's arm with a whoosh. Brat, you should thank me for not handing you over for tonight's barbecue feast. Ah ha 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 ha. The female demonic master stepped on the bald brat's back, using all her strength to stomp on the big iron pot on his back. She giggled as she trembled. What big brother, second brother, third brother? You are now my little slave. You only have a master. Ah ha ha ha. Arbor poked her little head out from Mo Lien's embrace, her fists involuntarily clenched tightly. Mo Lien, who could sense the change in her mood, hurriedly reached out to pacify her, whispering in her ear, "Wait a moment." Ah! Ah! The iron pod brat let out a series of roars and cries of despair as he was stepped on by the female demonic body master. His 10 fingers continuously dug into the ground. TSK, how boring. You only know how to scream at the top of your lungs. Can't you do anything else? Jean G, you're really brutal. A few demonic cultivators by the side teased. Village head. Let's have some entertainment. Right. The last time he dissected a living person, it was really nice. Ha ha ha. The village chief laughed and put his hands on his hips, revealing his bulging chest muscles. How about we do something more exciting today? Do you want to see it? Yes. The group of demonic masters below shook their chains and screamed excitedly. The village head let out an evil laugh. He suddenly stretched out his hands and clapped his hands 3 times. A low growl could be heard as a dark-skinned woman slowly pushed a wheelbarrow into the arena. The wheelbarrow carried a large square iron cage, and inside it was actually a tied-up level 4 zombie. The level 4 zombie opened its mouth, revealing 2 terrifying fangs. Its eyes were bloodshot as it roared angrily at the fresh meat on the field. Ha 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 ha. Everyone laughed maniacally in excitement. This is a level 4 zombie that absorbed all the power of a level 6 mystic cultivator. Its current ability is equivalent to a level 4 mystic cultivator. Chapter 701. The skinny dark woman tugged on the chain in her hand. After a series of rattling noises, the level 4 zombie in the cage threw itself against the iron cage, smashing against the pillar as it roared angrily. A group of demonic cultivators stood up with excitement in their eyes, raising their hands one after another as they shouted, "Me, me, me. Let me do it, let me do it. Why don't I see Mute? Where's the little sister that Mute brought back?" The Snake Beauty walked over from the center of the plaza, twisting her slender waist as her gaze slowly swept over everyone. When her gaze fell on Arbor, her eyes clearly brightened. But when she saw Mo Lien sitting beside Arbor, her brows involuntarily furrowed. She had a premonition that this man didn't look simple. "Where's your master?" The Snake Beauty twisted her enchanting slender waist as she approached Arbor and Mo Lien step by step. According to the rules of their village, whoever picked up someone would be that person's slave. Of course, if you wanted to present it to the village chief, that was also fine. If it was some good prey, presenting it to the village chief would make him happy, and perhaps even exchange it for better treatment. "Where's that Mute?" The Snake Beauty looked at the 2 of them suspiciously. She raised a slender finger, tilted her neck, and lightly tapped her fair chin. "There's no way that Mute would let the 2 of you come here alone. What's going on?" Arbor didn't pay attention to the Snake Beauty's thin screeching. Her gaze was fixed on the face of the skinny dark woman behind the wheelbarrow. A faint ripple appeared in the depths of her cold eyes. Although that woman had slimmed down quite a bit and tanned quite a bit, Xiaomu still recognized her with a glance. The skinny dark woman gestured for the two of them to come forward and drag the level 4 zombie out of the cage. That level 4 zombie shook its two arms with all its might, vainly trying to break free from its bindings. Its two tightly bound claws were twisting and scratching randomly. The two demonic cultivators wore iron wrist guards on their arms, so they weren't afraid of the level 4 zombie's touch, but their faces still carried a bit of disgust. Ha! The female demonic cultivator by the name of Jean Ji pulled the rolling and crawling bald little fatty forward. Let this little slave of mine test the waters first. Jean Ji, how can you be so shameless? It's not your little slave's turn. Me. Let my slaves come. The demonic cultivators screamed excitedly, their hands gripping the iron chains and swinging them. On the other hand, the numb faces of the many ordinary people who were being held by them finally showed a trace of fear. If they were allowed to go up and fight with this level 4 zombie puppet, they would undoubtedly become food in the zombie's mouth. It would definitely be a dead end. Jean Ji, go down. According to the rules, we have to draw lots. The village chief raised his hand and glanced at the female demonic cultivator, Jean Ji. He then lowered his head and looked at the iron walk brat who was lying on the ground, panting like a dog. Hee, are you sure you want him to go up? That's right, village chief. Jean Ji raised her chin high. I've helped Mother Jin catch many lambs these past few days. Even if there's no merit, there's still hard work. Can't you agree to such a small request? The skinny dark woman by the name of Mother Jin didn't even bat an eyelid. She only pulled the iron chain in her hand. Anyone is fine. Chapter 702. But if your slave is eaten by the corpse puppet within minutes, you will also be punished. Mother Jin says with a sneer. That's right. The crowd of demonic cultivators below churns and screams, we want to watch an exciting match. That's right. If there's nothing to watch, you will also be punished. Go down, Jean Ji. Don't talk about a minute, I think your little slave won't even be able to hold on for a second. Facing such a strong level 4 corpse puppet, how can the bald little fatty be its opponent? Hearing that, Jean Ji is very angry. She heavily kicks the bald little fatty, you better buck up. Go up. If you dare to lose within a minute, I will skin you alive. The bald little fatty groans and slowly climbs up from the ground. He shakes the chains on his hands, and his eyes emit a crimson cold light as he stares fixedly at Jean Ji. That's right, it's this kind of warlike gaze. Jean Ji smiles enchantingly. She stretches out her hand and pats the little fatty's chubby face. She giggles and says, I think highly of you, little fatty gidge. You can definitely do it. Bah! The bald little fatty spits at her. Everyone bursts into laughter. Jean Ji's face instantly turns green. Without thinking, she swings a slap towards the little fatty's face. Slap! The little fatty straightens his neck and gnashes his teeth as he stares fixedly at Jean Ji. Right now, the depths of his heart is filled with hatred. This group of filthy, perverted, and twisted bugs. They killed 3 of his brothers. He hated that he couldn't drink their blood and eat their flesh. He wanted to grind all of their bones and scatter their ashes. Let the little fatty go. Let the little fatty go. Ha ha ha. This group of neurotic demonic cultivators start to shout again. They excitedly clap their hands and vigorously cheer for the bald little fatty. Look, the little fatty is carrying a big iron pot on his back. He should be a chef, ah ha 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 ha. Arbor's gaze falls on the bald little fatty. She has also met this little fatty once. It was that day when she made up her mind to leave Paradise Planet. As he descended from the snowy peak, he saw the little fatty Zhang Yu and a few of his brothers. At that time, the four of them wanted to go to the snow-capped peak to dig something. For a moment, she wanted to kill them, but then she let them go. It was only because this Zhang Yu had a history with the Holy Waters sect when he was young. But they didn't expect that the world would play tricks on them. They were allowed to live, but they still couldn't escape the fate of being slaughtered by the strong. At this moment, only the little fatty Zhang Yu was left in the four-man adventurer team. His three brothers had all become food on the disgusting grill. These deranged demonic cultivators simply could not be called human. Activate the defensive barrier. At the village chief's command, 4 level 6 mystic cultivators wielding defensive mystic weapons walked forward. At the same time, they injected a wisp of mystic energy into the defensive mystic weapons. Faint rays of light crisscrossed in all directions and propped up a defensive barrier in the center of the plaza. The village chief crossed his arms and looked at the little fatty in amusement. Old rules, if you can survive this game, then we'll let you leave this place. Oh. The demonic cultivators below all let out excited shrieks. This side show truly made people so excited that their blood was boiling. Chapter 703. Little girl, are you also mute? The snake beauty glanced at Arbor and Mo Lien with a strange gaze. She shot a glance over, and one of the ordinary people mixed in with the crowd received her instructions and quietly went into hiding. Arbor slightly hooked up the corner of her lips. Stupid woman, even if they killed someone, they wouldn't let the mute's corpse lie in his own house for nothing. Of course, they would use some medicine to dissolve it. Wouldn't it be a bit too late to find the mute now? Since little girl is also interested in this game, then okay, big sister won't hinder you from watching the show. I'll watch it with you. The snake beauty smiled enchantingly as she glanced at the middle-aged man sitting next to Chow Mu, who was a stool away. That man saw the snake beauty's gaze and promptly stood up respectfully. He bowed slightly and saluted her. Vice Hall Master, please sit here. Vice Hall Master. Arbor and Mo Lien glanced at the snake beauty without batting an eyelid. This form of address was a bit interesting. It didn't seem like a form of address for a villager. Could it be that this snake beauty wasn't from the village, or was she someone above the village chief? The snake beauty giggled and twisted her slender waist to sit on the stool next to the middle-aged man. Then, she glanced at Arbor, who was some distance away, and felt that the stool was a bit too far away. She simply dragged the stool over and sat down next to Arbor. Mo Lien looked over with an icy gaze and met the snake beauty's disdainful gaze. The latter rolled her eyes at him and completely ignored him. She just smiled and approached Arbor, saying, "Little girl, big sister will tell you. This program of the battle between humans and corpses was personally designed by the village chief. He's a capable person and can often come up with some ideas that others can't think of. The disparity in strength is so great, it's not good to watch." Arbor turned her little head and snorted. The snake beauty patted her long, bare legs. "That's right, little girl. Big sister has decided to let Jean Ji also enter the arena. What do you say? I don't want to watch the fatty. I just want to watch Jean Ji and the corpse puppet fight. The fight between a beauty and a corpse is very interesting." Little rascal gave the final word. On the side, Mo Lien twitched his mouth. The snake beauty suddenly stood up and raised her hand. "Throw the little fatty out. Let Jean Ji go up." The group of demonic cultivators were instantly dumbfounded. What was going on? "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Upon hearing this, several level 6 and level 7 mystic cultivators immediately twisted Jean G's arms and dragged her into the defensive barrier. Jean G's beautiful face turned pale. She turned her head and angrily glared in the direction of the Snake Beauty. "Fuck you. Snake Beauty, what are you doing? Hurry up and release me. I'm a second-grade demonic cultivator in the village. You can't do this to me. Fuck. Fuck." While they were talking, the bald fatty had already been dragged out of the defensive barrier and thrown out of the assembly. Mother Jeanne also threw away the chains in her hands and walked out of the defensive barrier with the village chief, leaving behind the tied-up rank for zombie alone. It hopped around in circles in the center of the plaza and roared angrily. "Go in." Those mystic cultivators forcefully pushed Jean G, causing her to stagger and stumble into the defensive barrier. Ah! Ah! Fuck! When Jean G looked up, she saw a close-up and magnified zombie's stinky face. That disgusting appearance of crawling corpse worms covering its face made her vomit. Crack! The level 4 zombie opened its mouth and bit the air. Because its hands and feet were still tied up, it could only open its mouth and roar angrily as it charged at Jean G. Chapter 704. In the nick of time, sharp thorns extended from Jean G's 5 fingers and pierced into the level 4 zombie's throat with a whoosh. It was just that she was a little afraid of being infected by the corpse poison, so she pulled out the thorns from her fingers in less than a second and jumped back a few steps. She had fused with the poisonous mountain thorns, so when she attacked people, she could choose whether to use poisonous thorns or non-poisonous thorns. For example, when she had grabbed little fatty's flesh just now, she had used the non-poisonous thorns. But now, facing such a powerful level 4 zombie, in order to save her life, she had to use her best ultimate move. However, with her current ability, she could only use the poisonous thorns 3 times a day at most. There were 7 levels of demonic cultivators, from weak to strong. An average person who could cultivate to the level of a 3rd-grade demonic cultivator was already strong enough. The cultivation of a demonic cultivator was much more difficult than what an average person could imagine. Walking on the path of a demonic cultivator meant that you already had no way out. And Jean G was a 2nd-grade demonic cultivator. In the entire village, she could be ranked in the top 100. But even so, the Snake Beauty still treated her like trash that could be discarded at any time and threw her into the field to fight the level 4 zombie for the entertainment of the people. Charge! You big idiot! Several demonic cultivators in the front row angrily slapped their thighs and roared at that silly level 4 zombie. That level 4 zombie didn't fall down after being pierced in the throat by the poisonous thorns. Instead, it hesitated on the spot for a while and looked at Jean G with some confusion. Idiot, hit her, hit her. Hit, hit. Kill her, kill her. The demonic cultivators all raised their fists above their heads and roared with surging emotions. Jean G retreated a few steps and panted slightly. The thorns between her fingers faintly emitted a blue luster of poisonous light. The poisonous thorns attack just now had been effective. She just had to be a little more careful later. Roar! The level 4 zombie fiercely struggled free of the broken bindings on its body, revealing its naked body. The ropes that were originally tied to its body were all broken by it. It roared angrily and suddenly pounced in Jean G's direction. How could a delicious snack not cause the zombie to roar angrily in front of it? It wanted to eat. Roar! The level 4 zombie abruptly stretched out its 2 stiff arms and went straight for Jean G. Jean G staggered backwards and rolled along the ground. She jumped to the back of the level 4 zombie and stabbed her 10 fingers, which were equipped with poisonous spikes, into the back of the level 4 zombie. Roar! The grade 4 zombie stretched out its hand in pain and slapped Jean G's head. Jean only felt a huge force hit her, making her dizzy. She spat out a mouthful of blood and fell heavily backwards. Good. Good. All right. The demonic masters cheered crazily. Some of them even stood up excitedly and applauded heavily. Their faces were filled with bloody smiles. Kill her, kill her, kill her. The snake beauty covered her small mouth and giggled. She turned her head to look at Arbor and couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. What's wrong with this little girl? She was watching such an intense match with an expressionless face. Facial paralysis was really an illness. It had to be treated properly. Little girl, isn't the match exciting? Why don't you smile at all? The snake beauty really wanted to tease this little guy to talk. Chapter 705. The stoic face turned around and coldly glanced at her. Is it very funny? The snake beauty, that it was originally very funny, but as soon as I saw your expressionless little face, I suddenly didn't want to freaking laugh anymore. At this time, the level 4 zombie shook its head. Because its back had suffered a heavy blow, it swayed its body in place, feeling a bit dizzy. When it turned its head and saw Jean lying on the ground, it pounced at her with a roar. Fierce shouts erupted from the audience. Every neurotic demonic cultivator couldn't sit still. The people in the back even stepped on the long bench, waving their fists to encourage the zombie. Tear her apart, ahahaha. Tear her apart, tear her apart. Oh, okay. Ha 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 ha. It's time to eat, ha 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 ha. Arbor swept a glance over the large group of lunatics behind him. Were these people all sick in the head? Little girl, don't look at us like we're lunatics. The snake beauty cutely pouted her small mouth and called out softly, we're not lunatics. It's just that life is too boring. If we don't find some entertainment for ourselves, then wouldn't we have no goals in life at all? Arbor snorted disdainfully. Your goal in life is to stay in this underground world in decadence and kill for fun every day. The level 4 zombie finally got its wish and pounced on Jean's body. It opened its huge mouth, and its sharp fangs tore open a piece of flesh on Jean's chin. Jean only had one last chance to use her poison stinger today. She knew she was dead for sure. Even if she didn't die for the time being, she had already been infected by this level 4 zombie. In a few days, she would also become a monster like him. Her 10 fingers, which had turned into highly toxic poison, were already aimed at the level 4 zombie's head. Even if she died, she had to avenge herself first. But at this time, her line of sight suddenly froze. A copper ring strung together by a rotten rope suddenly fell out from the pile of rotten flesh on the zombie's neck and swayed back and forth in front of Jean's eyes. Jean's eyes widened in horror, and she stared fixedly at the level 4 zombie in front of her just like that. Its face, which was full of rotten flesh, suddenly transformed into the face of a man with a silly smile. Wife, I bought this copper ring from a street stall. I think it looks pretty good. The boy next door also bought one for his wife. I can't let my wife down. The guy next door is wearing a low-level defensive ring. Do you know anything about defensive rings? Buy me a knockoff. Wife, when I have money, I'll buy you a better defensive ring than the one next door. Ah, why is it you? Why? Jean's eyes were filled with tears, and the poisonous thorns on her 10 fingers gradually retracted. She could feel her body being gnawed away by the zombie. The physical pain was nothing, but the pain in her heart was indescribable. Her tears fell onto the head of the level 4 zombie puppet. The level 4 zombie glanced at Jean in confusion. Although it had gained some intelligence, it was not enough for it to recognize that the woman in front of it was once his wife. The undead hag only continued to bite at its food out of instinct. It It's just food. Husband, are you hungry? Jean-Ji's voice trembled slightly. Because she had lost too much blood, her vision was already a blur. Then you can eat me. Chapter 706. Arbor's fingers clenched tightly. When the snake beauty at the side saw this, she giggled enchantingly. Little girl, are you a little regretful? You shouldn't have pushed Jean-Ji out to die like this. TSK, 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 look at how tragic and pitiful they are. They were originally a very loving couple. But now, it has actually evolved into a situation where they kill each other, hee hee hee. The snake beauty laughed in a cadence. At this time, the assembly hall had long erupted into an uproar. Everyone jumped up and applauded jubilantly because they had watched a great drama. It was as lively as New Year's. Get lost. Mo Lien impatiently brushed away the snake beauty's approach with a flick of her sleeve. She reached out and hugged her darling a little closer, stroking her little head while holding her in her arms. You bunch of demons and monsters, how are you worthy of being called humans? Mo Lien sneered. What's so pitiful about that Jean-Ji? Haven't the slaves who died in her hands in the past never exceeded 10 digits? Heh, she only has herself to blame. What does it have to do with my darling? I'm talking to little sister, why are you interrupting? The snake beauty's expression instantly darkened, and she glared at Mo Lien with extreme dissatisfaction. Get lost, I don't want to talk to you, Arbor said coldly. Snake beauty. Can you give me a little face, little sister? Arbor didn't want to say a single word right now, nor was she in the mood to deal with the snake beauty beside her. She sincerely hoped that she could get lost far away. At least for the time being, she didn't want to talk to anyone here. However, the snake beauty loved teasing the stoic face. She didn't give up and continued to tease her. Little miss, do you think that the drama just now was wonderful? Look at Jean-Ji. When she found out that the fourth-rank zombie in front of her was actually her husband, her expression at that time, oh, ha 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 ha. Isn't it wonderful and special? Isn't this unexpected encounter well arranged? TSK, don't you think she's stupid? She clearly already knew that the one in front of her was only a corpse. Realistically speaking, he couldn't be considered her husband at all. She clearly had the chance to kill it, but she didn't. TSK, TSK, I almost thought she was a good person. The snake beauty continued to chat with the little stoic, even though the little stoic didn't utter a single word and didn't even look at her out of the corner of her eye. What does a pervert like you know? The little stoic suddenly said coldly, every person who can be called a person has once left behind a pure land in their heart. If even this last piece of pure land disappears, then whether it's life or death, it doesn't matter anymore. Mo Lien's heart tightened and she suddenly reached out to hold the little fellow's little hand tightly. He didn't know why, but he felt that when the little thing said those words, its eyes were illusory and didn't look like it was alive at all. This kind of nothingness that no one could touch made his heart feel very uncomfortable. He held her little hand tightly and gently squeezed it. As for the snake beauty, she coldly looked at the little girl beside her. You're saying that I'm not human. Do you believe that I can immediately let you enter that defensive barrier and come into close contact with that fourth-rank zombie? The snake beauty suddenly drew close to her, and a bewitching dark red color was concealed in the depths of those approaching eyes. It was rather bewitching and wanton, like a merciless whirlpool that wanted to suck in a person's soul. Chapter 708. In reality, it was naturally impossible for Wu Yanjun to recognize the 7-year-old Arbor and the soon-to-be 15-year-old Arbor at a glance. It was also because her stoic expression didn't change much that Wu Yanjun only felt that she looked familiar. The little fellow was used to sticking an aura-restraining talisman on herself when she went out. This kind of aura-restraining talisman was drawn when she first learned how to draw talismans. They were all beginner-level talismans that could lower one's cultivation by 5 levels. So right now, she looked especially sincere, like a tiny level 6 mystic cultivator. A level 6 mystic cultivator actually wanted to challenge Mother Jin in public. This time, it really stirred up the emotions of all the demonic cultivators. The snake beauty's expression was very unsightly, and she turned to glare at Mo Lien. You actually didn't stop her. Would it work if I stopped her? Mo Lien swept her a glance with a sneer. If I stopped her, wouldn't you have let her go up and fight with a level 4 zombie? The snake beauty curled her lips and crossed her arms in front of her chest. A bit interesting. Mo Lien coldly cast her gaze aside. Who exactly are you people? The snake beauty asked with a smile. I had people go to Mute's house to check, but there weren't any traces. Don't tell me Mute was annihilated by you guys. But it doesn't matter. The snake beauty chuckled, her smile somewhat cold. Mute was originally one of the few people at the bottom of this village. He already hasn't found any prey for nearly half a month. So look at him. He's so skinny because there's no meat to eat. If Mute died, then he died. It's just that I want to know what your purpose in coming here is. A small, sharp dagger appeared between the snake beauty's fingers, and it deftly slid and flipped between her fingers. On the other side, the neurotic demonic cultivator's emotions had already been completely ignited by Arbor. Everyone stood up and shouted agitatedly, their emotions exploding and boiling. Hit her, hit her, hit her. The corners of Wu Yanjin's lips curled up slightly. She suddenly reached out and untied the black robe covering her body, revealing a short green robe inside. She then entered the defensive barrier in high spirits. When the level 4 zombie saw that there was more food coming to its door, it hurriedly threw away Jean Ji's already cold corpse and pounced towards Wu Yanjin with a roar. In the blink of an eye, Wu Yanjin's fat, deformed palm slid out of her sleeve and slapped the level 4 zombie's head. With a crisp bang, the level 4 zombie puppet's huge head was split open like a watermelon by Wu Yanjin's slap. Wow! Around the market, the crowd screamed and cheered. It couldn't get any better, all right. Sure enough, Mother Jin was too strong. The moment she made a move, she directly smashed the head of a level 4 zombie like it was a watermelon. Ahahaha. The demonic cultivators laughed wildly as they jumped and roared in unison, kill her. This little mystic cultivator who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you think you're so great just because you're a mystic cultivator? Let me tell you, even if we're not mystic cultivators, we can still wring the heads of you mystic cultivators off one by one like watermelons. Arbor slowly walked into the defensive barrier amidst this wave of emotional shouts. He coldly raised his head and swept his gaze around. Can you all shut up? A bunch of men, yet they're shouting like ducks. Chapter 710. This kind of confinement talisman's effect could barely be maintained for a minute. However, in a battle where every second mattered, it was enough for talisman masters to do whatever they wanted with a flip of their hand. Wu Yanjin's bare paw returned to her wrist, and she staggered back a few steps with a dejected expression. Her other hand tightly clutched her throat, and soon, her palm was drenched in sticky blood. Seeing that something was amiss, the village chief hastily walked into the defensive barrier. Little girl, immediately stop your willful and reckless attack. Otherwise, you will be punished by blood. You can't bear the consequences of this. Before the village chief could say the word rise, his pupils abruptly contracted. Inside the defensive barrier, the little girl suddenly raised her hands, and a pair of plain-colored sleeves embroidered with twining branches fluttered in the wind. Water continuously flowed from her hands and landed on the ground. Kacha, Kacha, Katja, for ice walls rose from the ground, locking herself and Motherjin inside. The ice walls rose higher and higher, faster and faster. Just as the village chief and his subordinates wanted to scuttle into the defensive barrier, they were firmly held down by an extremely thick and terrifying aura. That aura was like a mountain pressing down on the village chief and the others. They had all tried to barge into the defensive barrier and stop Arbor from building the ice walls. But now, they were pinned to the ground by that aura, and cold sweat broke out on their foreheads. When the entire ice wall sealed off all directions, the ice wall began to move. Everyone in the plaza, regardless of whether they were demonic cultivators, mystic cultivators, or ordinary people, all looked at this scene in astonishment. A water spirit master was actually a water spirit master who could use such a strong water spirit master. The snake beauty muttered to herself as she looked in Arbor's direction, slightly raising her long eyebrows. She actually made an error in judgment. At the top of the 4 ice walls, a transparent ice wall was slowly sealing the space above the 2 people's heads. Finally, it was seamlessly sealed. The 2 people were isolated from the crowd and sealed within a rectangular, transparent, sparkling ice wall. The circle of fire on the periphery illuminated this ice wall, making it seem somewhat dreamy. Wu Yanjin wanted to speak, but as soon as she opened her mouth, blood gushed out from her throat. She could only glare at Arbor with a pair of venomous eyes, using her gaze to ask her, "Who are you?" Arbor ignored Wu Yanjin, this shrew. In reality, it was a bit strenuous for her to use water to create such a large ice wall for the first time. She was silent right now because she was seizing the time to recover most of the mystic energy in her mystic meridians. She wasn't sure how others used water and fire spirit power. In any case, ever since she merged with the natal essence water, she was able to use her profound energy to control this surge of water spirit energy. This was indeed very strange, and she herself also felt that it was a little strange. Logically speaking, her profound energy had yet to transform into spiritual energy, so she shouldn't be able to control the water spirit. However, when she used her profound energy to control the water spirit energy, it was rather easy for her to do so. On the other side, when Wu Yanjin saw that Arbor was ignoring her, she became even more nervous and stared straight at her. "Who the hell are you?" Arbor only recovered for a bit before taking a deep breath. Her gaze revealed a trace of frigidity as she stared at Wu Yanjin, who was using her gaze to question her. Her small mouth slightly opened as she spat out a cold sentence. "Go to the Yellow Springs and ask around." "Who am I?" "I'm the person who wants your life." Chapter 7:11. Arbor's eyes narrowed and a burst of powerful profound energy exploded from her body. In an instant, one of the ice walls closest to Wu Yanjin suddenly turned into pieces of 6 water chestnut snowflakes. Wu Yanjin clutched her neck and stiffly turned her head around, only to see pieces of snow flying up. This scene was truly a little frightening. What kind of water spirit control was this? Arbor gently raised a small hand and pushed her palm forward slightly. All the 6 water chestnut snowflakes fluttered and spun in the air like fairies singing and dancing. In an instant, they uniformly surrounded Wu Yanjin's direction. Walala, a large mass of snowflakes whooshed around Wu Yanjin's body, cutting her up and down. Outsiders simply couldn't see the situation of Mother Zhen, who was surrounded by snowflakes. They could only see her figure moving back and forth within the ice walls. Her speed was extremely fast, but the speed of the snowflakes surrounding her was even faster. Wu Yanjin's body expanded by more than 3 times in an instant, turning into a war bear. She let out a weak, miserable howl, mixed with the gurgling sound of death coming from her throat. Everyone finally got a clear look at her current sorry state. Her hair was bald. Her limbs and body and even her face were scraped by the snowflakes until there wasn't a single piece of undamaged flesh. Bang! Another ice wall shattered, completely turning into a mass of snowflakes, pressing towards Wu Yanjin's tall body. Following closely, one after another, the remaining 3 ice walls all cracked. Snowflakes were like turbulent torrents, like pieces of small sharp daggers, piercing through Wu Yanjin's body and limbs. She was attacked from the front and back. Her entire body was being torn apart by this kind of extreme torture. Like crazy, she swung her bare paws with all her might, slapping away the snowflakes that gathered around her. But it was completely useless. These snowflakes were extremely crafty and terrifying, even extremely spiritual. Even if they were slapped away by her, scattering into water droplets, but very quickly they would once again melt into ice and snow, absolutely endless. Aw, 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 aw. Wu Yanjin let out a series of hoarse roars. Because she had lost too much blood, there wasn't a single piece of undamaged flesh on her body. At the same time, her eyes also became abnormally blurry, almost unable to see the girl standing diagonally in front of her. Was this the limit? It must be very painful to have such a broken body, right? So back then, when her Shaolin was thrown into the wild like a ragged doll and was bitten by wild dogs, it must have been even more painful. What was this kind of pain? Arbor stretched out his hand, and his profound energy suddenly erupted violently once again. The snowflakes that had been circling around Wu Yanjin suddenly paused for a moment before shattering into pieces. The tiny snowflakes hit Wu Yanjin's skinny body. If it were only 1 or 2 snow particles, they wouldn't be able to harm Wu Yanjin at all. After all, she was a demonic cultivator who had fused with the sturdy body of a battleground bear. Her defense was naturally not to be underestimated. But right now, hundreds of billions of tiny snow particles were hitting Wu Yanjin's skin all of a sudden. Hundreds, thousands, and even tens of thousands of them hit every inch of her skin, instantly breaking through her defense. Everyone was dumbstruck and speechless as they watched Mother Jin being shot into a sieve in front of them. Countless tiny snow particles hit back and forth on her 4 limbs, smashing fiercely with whooshing sounds. Chapter 7:12. In the blink of an eye. All of Mother Jin's bones, flesh, and blood were crushed into fine powder by the dense shooting snowflakes. Her body was like a puddle of mud, loosely and softly falling down. With a crash, she broke into a pile of minced meat. The Snake Beauty's pupils abruptly contracted, and she reflexively looked at the little stoic standing far away. The little fellow's stoic little face was apathetic, cold, and solemn, completely devoid of any expression. Under the swirling snowflakes, the little girl in a plain pink dress was like a naturally formed sculpture in a world of ice and snow. The eyes of the merciless queen who controlled ice and snow contained endless desolation and loneliness. At the same time, after losing Wu Yanjin as their target, the fine snowflakes that filled the sky pierced through the outer defensive barrier with a whooshing sound. This caused the 4 level 6 mystic cultivators who were increasing their power to throw away the shattered defensive mystic weapons in their hands in fright and to flee to the back of the assembly hall. A level 6 mystic cultivator who was slow to flee was immediately pierced through the back of his head by countless snowflakes, and he abruptly fell to the ground. The village chief forcefully mustered all the strength in his body and broke through the pressure pressing down on his back. Because of this, he even spat out a mouthful of old blood, and his furious expression also contorted. "Hurry! Hurry! Kill that damn girl! Kill her! That damned girl, she actually killed Mother Jin." Mother Jin was one of the few third-class demonic cultivators they had nurtured. She was completely different from Jin Ji, that kind of mediocre second-class demonic cultivator. Previously, in order to let Mother Jin properly assimilate, they had expended a large amount of manpower and resources just to find that demonic beast, War Earth Bear. They had finally managed to nurture Mother Jin to a useful state, but now, she freaking died in the hands of an unknown little mystic cultivator. Even the village chief felt heartache at sacrificing a third-class demonic cultivator for no reason. After receiving the village chief's order, the demonic cultivators all rushed toward Arbor with crazed expressions on their faces. Mo Lien sneered. As soon as she moved, she was surrounded by a large group of demonic cultivators summoned by the Snake Beauty. Get out of the way if you don't want to die. A whip condensed from a line of fire, burning with raging purple flames, drew an S-shaped crack on the ground, sweeping across with an unstoppable strike. The bodies of the demonic cultivators who were touched by the purple flames suddenly ignited with a trace of purple flames. As the purple flames burned more and more vigorously, the demonic cultivators screamed as they rapidly retreated. A bunch of demons and monsters, how dare you block my path? Go to hell. Mo Lien's eyes turned cold. There seemed to be two pitch-black lotuses spinning in the depths of her eyes like whirlpools, faintly pulsing with two cold and evil lights. Merciless purple flames that seemed to swallow the heavens and devour the sun rose from his flipped palms, fiercely chasing after the demonic cultivators who were fleeing in all directions. Boom! The purple flames smashed a deep pit in the center of the plaza. Several novice demonic cultivators who were caught off guard didn't even have the chance to call for help before they were smashed into the deep pit by the purple flames and lost their lives. A pair of wings suddenly spread out from the village chief's back, flapping as he fled into the depths of the village. He shouted, "A strong enemy is invading, a strong enemy is invading. Activate the village's destruction talisman matrix. Activate the village's destruction talisman matrix." Damn it, that youth who didn't seem to have the slightest trace of mystic energy around him was actually an extremely powerful fire spiritual cultivator. Chapter 7:13. At this time, a sharp whistle appeared in the sky above the village. The ground violently trembled from this whistle. Everyone was forced to sway their bodies, and they were practically unable to walk properly. The large grill collapsed, and the three figures wearing the grill fell heavily to the ground. The little fatty carried the iron pot on his back and crawled on the ground continuously for several minutes before barely crawling to the front of his three bloodied brothers. He bawled his eyes out and bawled his eyes out. Run! The ordinary crowd was in chaos. Taking advantage of the fact that the demonic cultivators couldn't even take care of themselves, they all scattered like birds and beasts. Run! Everyone pushed and shoved each other in panic as they rushed toward the village entrance. However, after the destruction talisman matrix was activated, the entire village's ground became rugged and uneven. A crack or two opened up on the swaying ground from time to time, swallowing up the frantically running people one by one. One of the demonic cultivators seemed to have fused with the leopard's speed as he shuttled through the crowd very quickly. When he saw a fissure in the ground, he jumped over it very vigorously and dodged the fissure. The corners of his mouth curled up into a satisfied smile. In the face of danger, everything was fake. Only by running faster than others could one obtain a slim chance of survival. However, while this smile was still hanging at the corners of his mouth, the enormous bamboo building in the marketplace came crashing down with its roots. A large bundle of bundled bamboo sticks, and bamboo tablets smashed into his back with a loud bang. That demonic cultivator's mind went blank. He didn't jump in time and was immediately sucked into the merciless crack, leaving behind a pitiful howl. Arbor's figure flashed, and he blocked in front of that village chief who was flapping his wings, calling out, "Qingwan." He threw out several talismans in succession, and his entire body leaped up, landing steadily on Qingwan's back. Qingwan let out a shrill cry and spewed out a large mouthful of icy mist, which swept in the village chief's direction. The village chief was shocked, and he stared at Arbor in disbelief as he roared, "You're not a level 6 mystic cultivator, you're not a level 6 mystic cultivator. You're making a fuss over nothing and made yourselves miss it. Confinement talisman. Open." Arbor gazed coldly at the village chief and didn't answer his question. Instead, he used the confinement talisman right away. She wanted it. Capture them alive. 5 confinement talismans sealed village chief's escape route. Qingyuan was above him, completely blocking village chief's escape route. The village chief's pupils constricted. As the invisible chains climbed up his body and tightly bound him, he let out a shrill cry. Little girl, you've got guts. My master won't let you off. Don't even think about getting anything out of me. Oh. Arbor coldly spat out a word and threw out 2 more dictum talismans. Tell me, who built this underground village? Arbor's voice was cold as if it had been fished out from the cold night. Ah. Ah. The village chief hammered his head hard, and his eyes instantly became bloodshot. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. He knew something was wrong and retreated. The village chief screamed crazily, Master will not let you off. Ahahaha. Abruptly, the village chief self-detonated, directly shattering those invisible confinement chains around him. Although Arbor had long been on guard against this person, the force of the self-detonation at close range was truly too great, and she and Qingyuan were abruptly slapped to the ground. Chapter 7:14. Jojo. After burning several demonic cultivators who had surrounded him to death with his purple flames, Mo Lien looked up and saw his Chow Chow being sent flying by the burly village chief's self-detonation, sliding straight into a bottomless crevice in the ground. Mo Lien was so frightened that her heart trembled. She bounced up and swiftly darted to Arbor's side. Jojo. Arbor only had time to comfort her with a, "It's fine," before he was instantly pulled into the crevice by a suction force. Mo Lien. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. The rumbling sound of bubbling underground water reached her ears. Soon after, she seemed to see a round object fall into the crevice along with her. Boom! Arbor fell into the vast, ice-cold underground water. Following the surging underground water, he seemed to slide endlessly into the depths of the Earth's core. Jojo. Mo Lien swiftly chased after Arbor with a few leaps. She turned around and coldly ordered Hui Feng and the others, who were following closely behind, "Leave no one here alive." Without looking back, she directly jumped into the crevice with a bang. Mo Lien was also quickly swept down by the surging underground water. "Your Highness." Hui Feng turned pale with fright. He turned around and said to his subordinates, "You guys stay here and clean up." After saying that, he also jumped into the crevice after Mo Lien. The remaining several dozen nimble black-clothed youths immediately spread out and hunted down the demonic cultivators like wolves and tigers. The demonic cultivators were exhausted from running for their lives. How could they have expected that a small group of ominous stars would suddenly appear in the village and attack them without a second word? The ground kept shaking and cracking, and several demonic cultivators were sucked into the crevice due to a moment of carelessness. The youths of the Hidden Night Pavilion were carrying out a mechanical extermination in the dark night. On the other side, Arbor, who had fallen into a crack in the ground and was flowing down along with the rumbling underground water, only felt a little uncomfortable from the resistance of the water flow. He couldn't help but circulate his mystic energy to protect his body. "Master, don't worry. These water currents won't hurt you. Try to merge with them instead of resisting them. Try it, Master." The water baby's soft and cute voice suddenly rang in her mind. Assimilate. The water baby's words gave Arbor a hint of inspiration. She was originally an intelligent person and understood with just a hint. Immediately, she silently circulated her profound energy and tried to merge it with the surrounding water. In this way, she only felt that the water around her flowed happily. Clusters of water were like naughty elves, gently caressing her skin. The resistance quietly vanished. She was someone who had fused with her life essence water, so she should have a greater affinity with the water spirit than anyone else. The gushing water formed a circle around her body. Arbor reached out a finger and lightly touched it. The ice-cold water flowed along her finger and unwittingly formed a transparent membrane around her body. This water membrane adhered closely to her body and freely shrunk and enlarged as she stretched and moved her limbs. This was a water spirit barrier, right? She had roughly glanced through the usage of the water spirit in the technique chapter of the Spirit Division record. However, she could only control 1 or 2 small streams at that time, so she didn't look at this technique in detail. Who would have thought that by chance, she would inexplicably have an epiphany in the rapids? Chapter 7:15. It was different from the defensive barriers produced by external mystic artifacts, which required a large amount of mystic energy to activate. For example, in the assembly hall earlier, in order to expand the range of the defensive barrier, 4 mystic cultivators were required to use defensive mystic artifacts at the same time. The water spiritual barrier that Arbor comprehended now didn't require the help of any external objects. As long as one had sufficient spiritual energy, the water spiritual barrier's range could be large or small, and it only required a little spiritual energy to maintain the barrier for a long time. Compared to a large-scale defensive barrier, this was naturally more flexible, and less energy-consuming. Of course, if one encountered someone as powerful as Mo Lien, then it didn't matter and didn't care about the energy consumption. The technique chapter also specifically stated that very few people could comprehend this kind of full-body defensive spiritual barrier. Most people could only achieve a localized defense, such as a spiritual shield, a spiritual wall, or a spiritual armor that could produce a spiritual energy bracer, chest, and helmet. However, the little fellow felt that producing a spiritual armor was more impressive. She was currently wrapped in a thin water membrane. No matter how she looked at it, it was strange. The layer of water surrounding his body was as soft as a mutated eggshell. She poked it with a finger, and the water membrane softly protruded out a finger's length. Feeling cool. Sigh, she couldn't escape the fate of being an egg. She was still disdainful, completely unaware of how strange it was for a little mystic cultivator to create a water spiritual barrier. Arbor floated downstream. Aside from worrying that Mo Lien would be anxious, she wasn't afraid at all. She simply sat inside the water spiritual barrier and swayed along with the current. Coo! The little chick climbed up from behind her wet shoulder and sat on it. This underground water was too turbulent. If it hadn't been for the quick thinking of grabbing a strand of its master's hair, it would have been swept to who knew where. This underground river branched out in all directions. Who knew if it would be swept to the deepest part of the Earth's core, never to return? When the little chick thought of this, it shuddered and then looked at Arbor with adoration. Master, did you create this water spiritual barrier? His little master was such a troublemaker. She casually made a cover that could isolate the underground water, and he could finally take a breather. Xiao Mu sighed as she petted the little chick's head. She then took out the Hidden Night Pavilion's jade messenger tablet from her inner world. Mo Lien must be very anxious right now, so she decided to leave him a message first. I'm fine. Let's meet in Bailon City. After he finished writing, Arbor put away the talisman pen and waited patiently for a while. Seeing that there was no reply, he put away the communication jade tablet. Don't worry. Mo Lien will see it later. She won't be worried. A certain person comforted himself with a few words, calmed himself down, and looked around again. Dian, where do you think I'm drifting to? She didn't even know where the underground water led to. Would it directly wash her into the river? Wait a little longer, master. We'll reach the end soon. As the water baby's words fell, Arbor only felt the rumbling of the water beside his ears. His eyes suddenly lit up, and his body was instantly suspended in the air. Dear Chow Mu only had time to cry out, "Fuck," before her entire body fell from the sky. It turned out that after she was washed out of the cave by the underground water, she was washed down by a jade waterfall that was 3,000 feet high. The little chick shrieked and covered its eyes with its wings. Wah! Darling Chow Mu let out the first shriek since her rebirth. A little green face was frozen in time. Chapter 7:16. What do you mean it's going to end soon? This is a waterfall falling straight down from the sky. Our dear Chow Mu was wrapped in a soft water spirit barrier. Her small body was dizzy as she tumbled down, tumbling all the way down. If someone was watching at this moment, they would definitely think that she was very funny. The little fellow was like a small animal wrapped in a transparent soft ball. With one tumble, she was jolted by the waterfall and fell over headfirst. With another tumble, she righted herself again, her small hands and feet constantly swinging to maintain her balance. Arbor was speechless. The waterfall was abnormally steep. Arbor fell from the sky in a straight line to the lake below with a bang. It was only a matter of seconds. Her heart went through a hair-raising roller coaster ride. When her entire body fell into the lake, she couldn't react for a long time. Her body kept sinking in the lake water. Pfft. After a moment, a certain Chow Mu's small head finally emerged from the lake. She spat out a bead of saliva and wiped her small face with her hand. Coo! The little chick lay on her messy bird's nest hair. Its feathers were all wet and withered, and it couldn't help but gasp for air with its small mouth open. The little chick spat out 3 mouthfuls of water in a row and cried out pitifully, "Master, let's go up quickly." Arbor looked around. The night was dark. Arbor looked around. This lake was not even 1/10 the size of her peach blossom lake. One side was the waterfall, while the other 3 sides were mountains whose peaks couldn't be seen. At a glance, she didn't know where the clouds and fog were. "I wonder if we've returned to the ground." Arbor muttered and swam towards the lake shore. The little chick lay on her head and cooed, "Master, master, look at my wings. They can't be pulled up." "Aw." Arbor pulled her down from her head and held her in her hands. "Weak chicken, there's a cut on your wings. It must have been accidentally scratched by a sharp rock when you fell into the water from the crack in the ground." "I don't know. Normal rocks can't hurt me." Qinghuan was very puzzled. When did it become so weak? After that, the 2 of them squatted inside the water spirit barrier. Even if they fell straight down from a high altitude, they were not injured. Little Chickie spat out 2 more mouthfuls of water. "Don't worry, master. It's just a small wound. I'll bring you up later." Arbor swam ashore, looked down at his wet clothes, and frowned. "Little ball, pull us in." "Yes, master." Cho-Cho paused for a moment before asking, "What about that snake?" The little snake came out of her waist pocket and glanced at Arbor with its watery eyes. "Pull them in together." "Oh." Cho-Cho replied reluctantly. With her current cultivation, it would be rather strenuous for her to recruit a newcomer to Paradise Planet for the first time. Thus, when Cho-Cho heard that she would have to recruit another little snake, it was somewhat unhappy. Moreover, this little snake was obviously here to compete with Cho-Cho for favor. Cho-Cho was even more displeased. After entering Paradise Planet, Arbor left the little snake behind and hurriedly ran back to her little treehouse to change into a clean set of clothes. When she came out of the treehouse, she was holding many bottles and jars in her hands. "Weak chicken, the wound on your wings is quite serious. Don't move around, let me take a look." Arbor frowned and reached out to carry the little chick onto her lap and began to treat the wound on its wings. On the other side, the little water child was staring at the little snake with a serious expression. "You can't crawl around here, and you can't steal the vegetables in the field. Chapter 7:17. Little cute snake and little water child looked at each other. Swaying its little snake tail, it slithered over to Arbor's feet. Suddenly, it fell limply onto the ground. The little snake's lively eyes swept over everything in Paradise Planet, its watery eyes containing a trace of pleasant surprise. Wow, this place's mystic energy is so dense, I like it so much. Little water child immediately became alert. This scheming snake actually acted cute on the spot. How could this be? Luckily, Master was busy with the work in her hands and didn't have the time to care about this scheming snake. Humph. After Arbor finished cleaning the wound on Little Chick's wing, she suddenly made a sound of surprise. Little Chick stuck out its belly, and just as it was about to turn around, Arbor reached out and stopped it. Wait. Don't move. Arbor reached out and gently pressed on its wing. There seems to be a foreign object in your wing, does it hurt? It doesn't hurt. Little Chick said muddle-headedly. When you fell just now, you were scratched by something. Think about it again. There's nothing. Little Chick's face was filled with confusion. It was so strong, and it was an ancient Qingwan, not a real chicken. How could it be injured by a few small stones? Wasn't this a joke? Don't move. There should be some stones in your wing. I have to take them out, or else your wound will still hurt when it heals. Master. Little Chick was moved to tears. Master was so good to it. It was rare to hear Master speak so gently. Usually, she was cold. Xiao Mu placed it on a glossy stone block under the peach tree. She then rummaged through her needle pouch and took out a small brass tweezer. It hurts a bit. I have to take out the foreign object in your wing. Bear with it. Arbor said in a low voice. Little Chick was so moved that it immediately wanted to cry again. Master, do whatever you want. It doesn't hurt. Arbor looked at it in confusion. She thought to herself, you're not afraid of pain. Why do you look like you're about to cry? She didn't know how to comfort people. Oh, no, she was comforting a chicken. She used her fingers to stroke the outside of the little chick's furry wings inch by inch. Then, she used the brass tweezers to probe the wound. She accurately pinched something and quickly pulled it out. It was a soft clump of dirt that was as thick as a thumb. Xiaomu tossed this thing on the ground and poked it with her tweezers. She saw that a pinhole-sized hole had sunk into it, and it was incredibly soft. It would be too funny to say that Newbie had been scratched by a thumb-sized lump of dirt. Newbie didn't believe it, and neither did she. All right. Just apply some ointment on your wings and wrap them up. They should be fine by tomorrow or the day after. Ah, but Master, I have to send you up. Qingwan also saw that around the small lake, other than the waterfall, the other three sides were huge mountain ridges. I can do it myself. It's dark now, so we can climb tomorrow. Arbor quickly applied medicine and wrapped Qingwan with gauze. Master, there's someone outside, Chocho suddenly said. Who is it? Arbor was a little puzzled. I let out my spiritual sense to take a peek. It's a bald little fatty. He just climbed up the shore. Chocho jumped onto Arbor's hand and gestured. This kid is quite sharp. I used my spiritual sense to secretly size him up, and he looked around vigilantly. Arbor frowned slightly. Then how do I get out? Chapter 7:18. If she were to appear openly, wouldn't it raise suspicions? After all, what would people think if a person jumped out of nowhere? She didn't want to expose the secret of Paradise Planet in front of strangers. Why don't we wait for the little fatty to climb up before going out? Chocho suggested. That's the only way. Arbor nodded. She got up and just as she took a step, she felt that she stepped on a piece of rotten mud. Squeak. Xiao Mu even inexplicably felt that the clump of dirt under her feet seemed to tremble slightly. She hurriedly lifted her little foot and rubbed it against the peach blossom tree next to her, rubbing that small piece of soft mud down and dropping it under the peach blossom tree. What the hell was that? Arbor deliberately squatted down and looked at it carefully for a while. It was just a small lump of mud that couldn't be more ordinary. Let's go to sleep first. We'll go out tomorrow morning and think of a way to climb the mountain. Qi Muan's wings were injured, so it was better to let it rest for 2 days first. She wasn't a particular person. It wasn't difficult for her to climb a mountain with her hands and feet. 1 big and 4 small, twisting their small bodies, all ran back to their small residences. Arbor naturally returned to the treehouse she built herself. The little water baby built a small nest under the tree. At this moment, seeing the little snake swimming over, it immediately glared at it. What are you doing? This place is where I'm lying. The little snake glanced at it and didn't pay attention to it at all. It twisted its small body and climbed up the tree trunk. It climbed all the way to the roof of the treehouse and found a place with luxuriant foliage to lie down there. Arbor returned to the treehouse and checked on the little white squirrel's condition again before falling asleep. However, she didn't know that Mo Lien had been feeling uneasy ever since the two of them separated. Now that he couldn't sense Arbor's aura at all, he suddenly felt that the sky was about to fall down. This feeling overlapped with a certain time 2 years ago, making him feel uncomfortable. In fact, after Mo Lien jumped into the fissure, she was separated from Arbor by the tributaries of the underground water veins. After Mo Lien emerged from a small pool, she discovered that she was already in the tent area outside the Bailon fortification. Under the night sky, the stars were bright. Although it was already late at night, there were many people in the tent area and it was noisy. It was impossible to calm down. By the time Feng Manyun was called over to examine the patient, it was almost late at night. When she walked out of the tent after washing her hands after seeing the patient, the sky was already filled with stars. Dr. Feng, is there really nothing wrong with the patient? Just now, he was making a big fuss and wanted to bite anyone he saw. He couldn't have mutated into a zombie, right? A deputy manager of the Shed district followed behind Feng Manyun. Zombie transformation. It's not like he's dead. Feng Manyun glided ahead as she swept the manager an indifferent glance. What problem can there be? You don't believe in my medical skills? A young maidservant who was following closely behind Feng Manyun was holding a medicine chest with her sleeves rolled up. Upon hearing this, she scoffed, Deputy Manager, you can set your mind at ease. Our miss is one of the top 50 physicians in Celestial Medicine Valley. If she says there's no problem, then there's naturally no problem. That's good, that's good. How could the deputy manager dare to offend this great god of Celestial Medicine Valley? He naturally lowered his head and bowed as he repeatedly flattered her respectfully. The main reason was that there were many people in the Shed district. If something happened and they couldn't control it, the consequences would be unthinkable. Suddenly, Feng Manyun paused in her footsteps, and her gaze fixated ahead. She saw a slender and elegant figure quickly walking past her. Under the illumination of the moon, the young sir was truly as elegant as jade, unparalleled in his elegance. Speaking of which, did you guys draw a prize? Chapter 719. How's the little fatty doing now? The next day, Arbor woke up early, ate some porridge, and planned to leave Paradise Planet. Let's go, let's go. The little fatty is trying his best to climb up. He's been climbing for about half an hour. He should be far away by now. Cho chuckled. Master, you can go out now. Okay. Arbor reached out and picked up the little white snake, and had Chocho send them out. She could only come out of Paradise Planet from where she entered, so she had to find a way to go up the mountain and take a look. It was already early in the morning. As soon as she walked out, she saw the small lake, which shimmered slightly under the morning dew. Arbor raised her head and looked at one of the mountain peaks. Just as she was about to take a breath and climb up, she suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the mountain peak. Following her line of sight, she saw something that looked like a meat bun rolling down the steep slope of the mountain peak. Seeing that, Arbor's eyes went blank. The bald little fatty rolled down from who knows where. He rolled, and he didn't have any defensive barrier on him. With a bang, he fell in front of Arbor with his butt facing the sky. Arbor couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. She took a closer look and saw that the little fatty was in a daze from the fall. He was covered in cuts and bruises, and his entire person seemed to be in a daze as he lay on the ground for a long time. Only when Arbor couldn't help but cough lightly did he move his head slightly and look up. They saw that there were scars here and there on his chubby face. His face, which was originally like white flour, was now shaken by the rubble. This little fatty looked rather pitiful. "Why are you here?" The two couldn't help but ask in unison. The little fatty looked at Arbor with a confused expression, as if he didn't understand how a girl had appeared in the blink of an eye in a deserted place. Arbor didn't know that the bald little fatty Chocho was talking about was actually Zhang Yu. Could it be that when she fell into the crevice, she caught a glimpse of that round thing from the corner of her eye? Was this guy? Cough. Arbor looked up at the mountain peak in front of her with her hands behind her back. Zhang Yu quickly said, "Wait. I advise you to look for another mountain to climb." Xiao Mu turned her head to look at the bald little fatty in confusion. Zhang Yu said, "Sigh, there's a row of strange people on this mountain peak. It wasn't easy for me to get up there, but they stopped me at the mountain entrance and forced me to answer their questions. I got it wrong, so they threw me down." Little fatty thought that the young lady in front of him would definitely burst into laughter after hearing what he said. Who would have thought that the little girl would be expressionless and calm as if she had been paralyzed for 1,000 years? She only used a pair of black eyes to stare at him without blinking. Zhang Yu was a little embarrassed by her gaze, and he couldn't help but grin, revealing his white teeth. "Where's your pot?" "Walk." "What pot?" Little fatty didn't expect this girl to ask such a strange question, so he subconsciously followed up with a question. As soon as he answered, he knew that something was wrong. Sure enough, in the next second, the girl's hand glowed with a cold light, and a handful of shooting stars flew towards him, aiming for his upper, middle, and lower acupoints. "Fuck!" Little fatty jumped in fright, and immediately dodged to the side nimbly. He cried out in alarm, "Oh my God, the little girl killed someone, the little girl killed someone." Arbor waved her hand, and Debao suddenly appeared. Chapter 720. Arbor did not need to make a sound as Debao's body flickered with an ink-colored light. It was telepathic with its master. Debao did not need to hear Debao's order and immediately threw a punch at Debao's face. If Debao's punch landed, even if Debao did not die, Debao would be half dead. TSK, what a little fiend, little devil, little monster. Little fatty teased as he quickly dodged to the side. Debao did not waste any time with him. Debao immediately tangled with Debao and threw a flurry of punches at him. Debao had been completely modified by Mo Lien. It now possessed the strength of a 5th-level body cultivator. Although it was just a mechanical puppet, its limbs were very flexible. It was almost no different from a real person. After Debao had exchanged more than 100 blows, Debao became more and more amazed at how talented the person who created this mechanical puppet was. If it were not for the metallic texture on Dabao's face and body, Dabao would have thought that it was a real person. Dabao's moves were smooth. Its attacks and defenses were as smooth as flowing water. Dabao did not even see Dabao thinking. It could almost block his attacks in an instant. After such a fight, Dabao's heart was bitter. He cursed in his heart. When he looked up, he saw that the little girl's nimble figure was already halfway up the mountain. Fuck! This girl is not a human. Dabao panicked and wanted to rush up the mountain. However, Dabao had already seen through his movements. Dabao jumped up a few steps behind him and reached out to grab his left shoulder. Get down! Dabao did a backflip and kicked Dabao. Dabao did not expect Dabao to rush over and take his kick. Dabao gave Dabao a bear hug and threw Dabao onto the mountain. Bam! Dabao felt that his doughy face was about to be crushed. He really wanted to turn around and give Dabao a big slap in the face. Is this the way you hug a man? Dabao and Dabao were still fighting at the foot of the mountain. Arbor had already climbed to the top of the mountain. She paused and suddenly activated an invisibility talisman on herself. Then, she calmly continued to climb up. When she was about 3 or 4 steps away from the peak, she suddenly saw a big red morning glory standing on the edge of the peak, facing the wind. Arbor stealthily made his way over. The big morning glory seemed to have sensed something and turned towards Arbor's hiding place. The big blooming morning glory spat out a continuous stream of poison. Then, as if a little puzzled, Venom gurgled back. There was no one. Hee, this damned little fatty, he still wanted to deceive her. He knew that there was definitely something extraordinary on this mountain peak. Just now, little fatty must have been caught off guard and was hit by the poisonous morning glory's venom. He had dodged in a hurry and rolled down the mountain peak. Arbor hurriedly swallowed 2 antidote pills and rubbed his little hands subconsciously. He excitedly touched the back of the morning glory and revealed 2 white little teeth to the morning glory. Cho-Cho, did it take a lot of effort to bring it into Paradise Planet? Master, it doesn't take a lot of effort to collect plants. Cho-Cho immediately extended 2 small branches and whipped the big morning glory with lightning speed. Dabao then effortlessly dragged it into Paradise Planet. Chapter 721. Cho-Cho, you're awesome. Arbor gave Cho-Cho a rare compliment before using her spiritual sense to take a look. She saw that Cho-Cho was currently violently beating up the poisonous morning glory until it was completely docile. If Cho-Cho could even beat up holy water, what else couldn't it beat up? This morning glory's scientific name was the 6-yang poisonous flower. It was one of the most poisonous poisons in the world, and it had a lot of practical value when stored on Paradise Planet. If one came into contact with even a tiny bit of its yang poison, their skin would feel as if it had been severely scalded. It would blister, rot, and heal continuously. In the end, the person would be tortured to death by this pain. This process wasn't the least bit pleasant. If she had added this 6-yang poisonous flower to the beautifying pill back then, it would have been even better. Consort Jing would have been in so much pain that she wanted to die. In comparison, the nether star seed that she had added wasn't as poisonous as the 6-yang poisonous flower. Arbor was in a great mood after taking care of the 6-yang poisonous flower. Her footsteps moved slightly, but she suddenly stopped. She raised her small foot and lowered her head to pick up a seed. Cho-Cho, what is this? Everything was related to plants, so asking Cho-Cho was always the right choice. As expected, Cho-Cho cried out excitedly when it saw the seed in Arbor's hands. Master, you've hit the jackpot. This is the seed of a longevity tree. Heavens, I haven't seen a longevity tree in a very, very long time. I didn't expect this 6-yang poisonous flower to be guarding a longevity tree seed on a cliff. Oh, Oh. Oh, my longevity tree. Longevity tree. Could it be that it was being refined? Arbor was thinking to this point when she suddenly heard a huge tremor from the bottom of the mountain. Her heart tightened, and she hurriedly handed the seed to Cho-Cho to bring back. She was already flying down the mountain. Her debeo had just been repaired, so she hoped that something didn't happen again. Arbor quickly flew down the mountain and saw debeo lying on top of the little fatty. The two of them were stacked on top of each other by the lakeside. The loud tremor just now was probably caused by the two of them falling down from the mountain peak and landing heavily on the ground. Debao shook his butt and got up from little fatty's body. He turned around and ran towards her while shouting, "Little master, Debao is going to be beaten to death by this person." Arbor's lips trembled. He hurriedly dodged and avoided Debeo's hug. With a thought, a short, glowing ferrule appeared in her hand. The ferrule suddenly elongated, and Xiao moved swiftly dashed to the little fatty's front. Without a second word, she smacked the little fatty's head with a devastating strike. "Fuck, you fierce woman." Little fatty's pupils suddenly shrank. He quickly rolled and crawled towards the lakeside. Then, he suddenly stood up like a carp. However, just as he was about to stabilize himself, Arbor waved her hand, and a stream of water flew up along her small hand. By the time it reached little fatty's neck, it had already completely condensed into a sharp ice spike, stabbing straight towards his throat. This was really too savage. She never wasted words with you, nor did she explain anything to you. She just fucking directly attacked you. Stop, 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 stop. I admit defeat. I'll return to my original form, okay? Little fatty's voice suddenly became thin, long, and gentle. A chubby face that looked like a round dough abruptly slimmed down, and all the bones in his body returned to their original positions. Soon, a smiling face appeared in front of Xiao Mu. See you tomorrow. Chapter 722. Arbor swung her little hand and directly rewarded her with a handful of small nails. I'll go. The woman's slender waist swayed slightly, and in an instant, she changed her position and swiftly jumped to the side, glaring angrily. Little girl, you're really vicious enough. I've already returned to my original state, what else do you want? The woman in front of her had the appearance of 27 or 28 years old, and her figure was very voluptuous. At this time, her body had become longer and slimmer, and a large robe was loosely covering her body, revealing two legs that were as smooth as jade. Wasn't this the snake beauty that they had bumped into in the underground village earlier? Her bare feet gracefully walked a few steps towards Arbor's side, and asked in a negotiating tone, "Little girl, our top priority right now is to leave this damned place. If there's anything, how about we talk about it after we get out?" Arbor glanced at her with an unpleasant expression, then turned her head and quickly climbed up the mountain peak. The snake beauty was so angry that her face was crooked, and she also climbed up the mountain peak. That damned brat, his tone was so stubborn that it was really annoying to look at. When the snake beauty reached the peak, she couldn't help but let out a sharp cry. Arbor turned her head to look at her, only to see the woman reach out to cover her small mouth, looking at her with a shocked expression. "Hey, little girl, where's that man-eating flower?" "What man-eating flower? It was just a 6-yang poisonous flower." Arbor wasn't willing to talk to an illiterate with shallow knowledge, so she proudly turned her pink and tender little face away. The snake beauty actually giggled enchantingly. With a sway of her slender waist, the snake beauty walked towards Arbor's side. Her pair of beautiful eyes looked around the peak, only to see pine trees planted on it. Apart from that, there was nothing else on the mountain peak. Arbor had already released her spiritual sense to search the vicinity. The nearby terrain was a bit strange. After going over this mountain peak, the ground seemed to have sunk in, and there was a large pit in front of them, one after another. The mountain path was rugged and uneven, so it would naturally be difficult for ordinary people to walk on it. Arbor and the Snake Beauty, on the other hand, were moving exceptionally fast. They followed a muddy mountain path and ran down from the back of the mountain peak. In front of him was an endless pit, as if it was a natural trap. If he missed a step at any time, he would completely fall into the pit. "Little girl, quickly release your golem to scout the way," the Snake Beauty said hurriedly. Arbor glanced at the Snake Beauty. "You go and scout." The Snake Beauty grinned and pursed her lips into a smile. "You're really stingy. The golem won't die even if it falls into a pit. We can just pull it out again." Arbor chuckled. The Snake Beauty couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. "Miss, you'd better not laugh. That strange way of simulating laughter with your expressionless face is unbearable to look at." Arbor picked up a branch from the ground and threw it into a pit in front of him. Gulp. The wooden branch fell down and disappeared. "It's over, Mississippi. There are so many potholes in front of us. It's impossible for us to walk through them on foot. Why don't you summon that flying mystic beast of yours?" The Snake Beauty was naturally clear now that the little fellow wasn't some level 6 mystic cultivator. This little lass was too good at tricking people. "Summon yours," Arbor said indifferently. "Little sister, you're so stingy. How can people get along with you happily?" Then scram. The Snake Beauty was about to choke to death. Chapter 723. How could there be such a loathsome girl in this world? Would it kill you to say something nice? Telling her to scram at the slightest provocation, where could she scram to? It was truly infuriating. Arbor ignored her and took another rotten branch and threw it into the air. After a soft, poochy sound, the branch was quickly squeezed by an external force and shattered into pieces that rustled and fell to the ground. The Snake Beauty reached out to touch her nose and subconsciously looked at the little girl. As expected, she was still expressionless. These days, it wasn't easy to deceive little children. If Arbor had listened to the Snake Beauty's words and let Blue One carry her through this area, she reckoned that she would have suffered injuries on top of injuries right now. The sky above this crater area was filled with strong profound energy. If a bird touched this layer of strong profound energy, it would be bounced off. If it tried to attack that, it would be mercilessly obliterated, just like that rotten branch just now. Arbor injected a faint trace of profound energy into the branch. As a result, it fell to pieces. That vast and mighty rebounding force faintly made Arbor's wrist feel somewhat numb. With her cultivation, wanting to break through this layer of strong profound energy in one strike was simply a fantasy. She secretly opened her profound eye and raised her head to take a look. She only saw traces of profound energy filling the air above this crater area, intertwining with each other. If she wanted to break through by force, it would simply be a dream. The only way was through the crater in front of her. "You go first," Arbor coldly said. The Snake Beauty immediately shook her head like a rattledrum. "I don't want to. I'm not going to walk in front of you. If by any chance you push me from behind, wouldn't I die unjustly? Then don't go." Arbor suddenly scattered a handful of poison powder. The Snake Beauty was caught off guard and inhaled a mouthful of poison powder. She choked and coughed repeatedly, her delicate little face completely distorted. "Fuck. Where did this ominous star come from? Killing you just because of a disagreement. Wasn't this kind of demon that looked completely harmless on the surface more terrifying than the people of their underground village?" Cough cough, cough cough cough. The Snake Beauty secretly cried out and covered her chest with her hand. What kind of poisonous powder was this? How could it be so powerful? The snake beauty hurriedly gathered the poison in her body and transferred it out of her meridians as quickly as possible. Cough, cough, cough. He was too careless. He actually fell for the little girl's trick. If it weren't for her special ability of shifting her body and twisting her muscles and veins, she would have been able to control her body at will. If it were someone else today, they would have been killed by this little girl. However, she had only moved the poison to a bone to store it. In fact, she had not completely eradicated the poison in her body. She transferred the poison to a more harmless part of her body, away from her heart and brain, and the dizziness disappeared in an instant. With a calm face, the snake beauty raised her head and looked forward with an ice-cold gaze. He saw that the little girl had already walked to the middle of the pit area. She held a sturdy tree branch in each of her hands. As she walked, she carefully used the tree branches to explore the holes around her. Then, she chose the solid holes to run through. Although her speed was a bit slow, she estimated that she would be able to leave this place in about 2 hours. This damned child was so narrow-minded that he didn't let her take advantage of him. He tricked her and didn't let her follow the path she had opened and smoothly pass through. Chapter 724. Arbor purposely threw a handful of poison powder at the snake beauty to prevent her from following. She wanted to prevent the snake beauty from reaping without sowing and taking advantage of her. Arbor's thoughts were, what a joke. Is it so easy for others to reap the fruits of my labor when I, this darling, am scouting ahead? It's better to walk your own path by yourself. I'll scout my path, and you'll scout yours. You want to follow my footsteps. No doors and no windows. How could she have found this kind of scheming child interesting and cute back then? The snake beauty was perplexed after much thought. How blind was she back then? The snake beauty pursed her lips and walked forward without saying a word. At first, the distance between the two was quite far, but gradually, Arbor discovered that the snake beauty was swimming up. Yes, she was swimming. Those pink and white legs slid on the ground very quickly, soft and boneless. Arbor simply stopped and turned to look at her. She discovered that the snake beauty's naked legs were covered in a thin layer of snake scales. Upon closer inspection, those snake scales didn't directly touch the ground, but were slightly more than half an inch away from the ground. It turned out that the snake beauty was a demonic cultivator who had fused with a type of demonic snake. Arbor mused that she had been tricked by this fellow. It turned out that she could pass through this pit area so easily. But she had pretended to be delicate before. Arbor watched as she swam forward and glanced at her back and forth in confusion. She was very clear about the poison she had used. Not to mention a mere demonic cultivator, even a powerful mystic cultivator would have to drink a pot of poison powder after inhaling it. But why was the snake beauty completely fine in such a short time? This body was too strange, right? Her recovery ability was actually so good. Little miss, are you very curious about my body? The snake beauty suddenly smiled at her. She abruptly opened her mouth and sprayed out a poisonous mist mixed with a fragrant wind. This was the venom that she had completely mastered after fusing with the demonic beast fire Qilin-fanged snake. Now that she had modified it into a poisonous mist, most people would collapse upon inhaling it when she opened her mouth and spat it out, completely unprepared. TSK, stinky girl, you sprinkled a handful of poison powder on me, and I sprayed a mouthful of poison mist on you. Let's call it even. The snake beauty smiled wickedly at Arbor and stretched out her soft arms, intending to catch Arbor's body. Swoosh. A silver needle dipped in poison shot towards the snake beauty's eyes at close range. Startled, the snake beauty hurriedly bent her delicate waist, her entire body almost sticking to the mud, avoiding the silver needle that brushed past the tip of her nose. In the blink of an eye, Arbor had already summoned that club from his consciousness and furiously swept it down with a thunderbolt. Dang! A pair of short swords appeared on top of the Snake Beauty's head, and they crossed each other above her head. After blocking Arbor's ferocious attack, his body sank into the crater. Arbor flew up and bombarded the Snake Beauty's body 3 times in succession. Clang, 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 clang. He actually knocked half of the Snake Beauty's body into the crater. The Snake Beauty angrily glared at him. Little fellow, you didn't kill me when you sprinkled poison powder on me before. This time, you neutralized my poison mist, so we're even. Did you have to bury me in a crater? If it weren't for the fact that the situation was urgent, the Snake Beauty really wanted to laugh. Chapter 725. The 2 short swords above her head were clearly inferior to Arbor's club. They were already somewhat deformed from the club's smashing. Stop hitting. The Snake Beauty was flustered and exasperated as she called out softly, my head has been smashed by you, you brat. Can't you be a bit gentler with me? Clang. After Arbor smashed the last blow, she finally found the time to glance at the Snake Beauty. Half of this guy's body had been smashed into that pit by her. Unfortunately, this pit was solid. It would be even better if it was a trap pit. Who knows where the Snake Beauty would fall into this pit? Hey, hey, hey. Look at your sneaky eyes. Are you trying to trick me again? Could it be that you're thinking that if this was a trap, it would be even better if you directly threw me into the river of hatred? The Snake Beauty mumbled. River of hatred. What, you're still playing dumb? The Snake Beauty snorted, this area is full of potholes and continuous traps. Isn't this the Valley of Hatred? So this is the Valley of Hatred. Arbor muttered to herself, then that means the long sparse forest is in front. That's right. The Snake Beauty glanced at her suspiciously. Although the long sparse forest isn't big, ferocious beasts roam freely within. It's very difficult to break through. The monks of the Hidden Moon Temple who live in seclusion hate being disturbed by outsiders the most. It's useless even if you go, they won't see you. The traps at the Valley of Hatred were made by the monks. Of course not, this is a natural barrier. The Snake Beauty rolled her eyes, this Valley of Hatred has been formed for who knows how many hundreds of years. These monks just found a pretty good secluded residence. Liar. Arbor snorted coldly, there's clearly a dense mystic energy cover above this Valley of Hatred. It simply doesn't allow flying mystic beasts to pass through. You still dare to say it wasn't set up by humans? You don't understand. It said that the powerful mystic energy above this Valley of Hatred was set up by an extremely powerful great spiritual master. What does it have to do with the monks? Xiao Mu found a rag from somewhere, and under the Snake Beauty's panic-stricken expression, she directly stuffed the rag into her mouth. Long-winded. Woo woo woo. There was no justice in this world. She was the one who had asked the question, and she had answered it out of kindness. Yet, in the end, she had received such inhumane treatment. The Snake Beauty glared at Arbor angrily. Since it was the Lake of Hatred, it was perfect. Arbor didn't need this Snake Beauty to follow her anymore. She had to go to the Hidden Moon Temple to look for the startled swan dagger, so it was better for her to get lost. Just like that, the Snake Beauty was planted in a pit. Arbor naturally didn't care about her life or death. He directly bypassed her and continued to walk out of the river. The little guy imitated the Snake Beauty and stealthily raised his aura, allowing his legs to float half an inch off the ground. In this way, not only would he not be oppressed by the heavy profound energy above his head, he also did not need to go through the trouble of repeatedly exploring the path. Taking advantage of a loophole was actually an extremely ingenious method. The beautiful serpent woman was not much, but her brain was quite active. Arbor muttered to himself as he sped up and left the territory of the River of Hatred. On the other side, the Snake Beauty was so angry that she exploded. She was stuck in the pit and moved her body. A series of bone-cracking sounds could be heard. Not long after, a pile of clothes was scattered on the ground. A shiny little head poked out from the pile of clothes. The little monk raised a smooth little hand and rubbed his shiny little head. Ha ha ha. Chapter 726. The little monk looked to be about 5 or 6 years old. His lips were red and his teeth were white. If the little girl didn't like this innocent and cute appearance, then she must be a pervert. She had taken the wrong path before. Of all the people she could transform into, she had to transform into that little fatty with an iron pot on his back. Oh right, she had also forgotten to take Fatty's iron pot. Thus, the little girl had seen through her at a glance. This was really a technical mistake. The Snake Beauty shook her head and straightened her clothes. At this moment, her body was extremely small. A pile of clothes hung on her body. She tore the clothes and tore a few pieces to wrap herself up. A handsome little monk wearing red clothes was born. If one looked carefully, there was a trace of evil charm in his eyes. The Snake Beauty took out a mirror and looked at herself for a while. No matter how she looked at it, she felt that it was very pleasing to the eye. Oh my, if the little girl still didn't like such a natural and cute appearance, then she had nothing to say. The Snake Beauty moved and chased in the direction of the long sparse forest. A light flashed through her beautiful eyes. How could a damn little girl be so hard to deal with? She didn't believe in this evil. Arbor had already arrived at the entrance of the long sparse forest. She let the little snake out and led the way in front. Thus, the journey was smooth and unhindered. They didn't see any stupid beasts blocking the way. What ferocious beasts! Bah! They didn't even see a single bird. This Snake Beauty was a big liar. It would be strange if they believed her. After leaving the long sparse forest, they saw a solemn ancient temple in front of them. It was surrounded by pine trees and the eaves of the corridor were rotating. The temple's door was closed. Arbor walked up the steps and knocked on the door. After a long while, there was no movement. She went to knock on the door again. Just when she was about to impatiently climb over the wall, the ancient temple's door opened with a creak. The first to come out was an old monk. He looked to be in his 60s. His body was very thin and his eyes were full of wisdom. When he saw Arbor standing outside the door, he was clearly stunned. For a moment, he stared blankly. Arbor also glanced at him, then lowered his head to look at the little monk who was following behind the old monk and tugging at the corner of the old monk's clothes. This little monk was about 4 years old. His small face was as white as jade, and his chin was round and bulging. He looked very cute. The little monk was very shy when he saw strangers. He shrunk behind the old monk's waist and only revealed his small bald head, curiously looking at Arbor. At this moment, the old monk had already regained his senses and asked, "Benefactress, this small temple has been abandoned for many years. It has already been a long time since we received any visitors." Arbor flipped his small hand, took out the jade talisman and handed it to the old monk. When the old monk saw the jade talisman, he was stunned. He looked at Arbor in a daze and then stepped aside to make a path. "Benefactress, please come in." The scale of this ancient temple was only average. The old monk said that the temple had been abandoned for many years, but the interior was still neat and tidy, clean and refreshing. "I am Kong Yin, the abbot of this small temple." As the old monk spoke, he invited Arbor into a meditation room. "I wonder where Benefactress got this jade talisman. I got it by chance in a deserted small town. I wonder why Great Master would ask this. Arbor said lightly. The old monk held the jade talisman and seemed to be emotional. Chapter 727. This sound transmission jade talisman is indeed an old friend's item. This old monk hasn't seen it for more than 10 years. The old monk sighed emotionally, then nodded at Arbor. Please wait for a moment, benefactress. Then he walked to the side of the meditation room, and took out a pitch-black box from a row of teak drawers. Reaching out his sleeve to stroke the box, the old monk held the box and stared at it blankly for a while. The little monk was wearing a small gray monk robe, kneeling on a small futon next to Arbor, his watery eyes constantly sizing up this foreign guest. The old monk held the black box and turned to face Arbor. After sitting down, he handed the box in his hand to Arbor. Benefactress, this is yours. Jing Hong. Arbor didn't expect this trip to go so smoothly. There was no need for any handover procedures, and the old monk handed Jing Hong to her as soon as he saw the sound transmission jade talisman. Wasn't this a little too shocking? The old monk nodded, and sighed deeply. This old monk has waited here for a full 14 years. From now on, I can finally resolve this obsession, and I have to thank this young benefactress for her help. Arbor asked curiously, what is obsession? The old monk stared at Arbor in a daze, and muttered to himself, like. Even the question he asked was exactly the same. Like what? The old monk didn't say anything, but Xiao Mu was completely baffled by his words. She looked at the old monk and said, if you had experienced life and death and faced the most unbearable past, perhaps you would know that obsession and whatnot are all nothingness. Only when you can't get what you want will you have obsession. If you don't want anything, isn't it fine? Arbor said, and couldn't help but laugh. It's easy to say, how can a person not want anything? Like her, no matter how much she wanted nothing else, praying for the safety of her family was also a request. Arbor said softly, as a person, do things, and stay true to your heart. Why do you have to care so much about what the world thinks? She didn't even realize that she had relaxed her mind in front of an old monk whom she had just met. She smiled inexplicably. It was as if the old monk was an old friend that she had not seen for a long time. In front of the old monk, she did not need to set up any defenses. The old monk looked at Arbor in a daze for a long time, and then he laughed. Yes, but no. Good child, you are much more carefree than her, ha 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 ha. With such a joyful laugh, the two of them became less restrained and their conversation became more natural. The little monk was stupefied as he watched from the side. He had never seen his master treat anyone so cordially before. In the past, many of the guests who came to his door were like this benefactress in front of him. They were dressed in brocade and were obviously high officials and nobles. However, his master had never been polite to them. Child, this is a remote village in the mountains. It's not easy for you to come here. Stay here for a couple of days before you leave. Thank you for your kindness, Grandmaster. However, I still have important matters to attend to, so I can't stay here any longer. Thank you for your kind intentions, Grandmaster, Arbor hurriedly said. She had to hurry to Balon fortification immediately. She was worried that Mo Lien would be anxious. Since that's the case, then you must have a vegetarian meal before you leave, the old monk quickly said. Arbor nodded. Deference is no substitute for obedience. The old monk nodded with a face full of smiles. Take a look at this graceful sword first. I will go prepare the vegetarian dishes. Chapter 728. Thank you for your trouble. Arbor nodded. After watching the great master leave, she raised her hand and touched the pitch-black box. From the outside, this box was as warm as jade, without the slightest peculiarity. However, after opening it, a strong murderous aura accompanied by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth gushed out. Only then did Arbor realize that this seemingly ordinary box was actually able to completely lock the aura of a divine weapon inside, not letting the slightest bit of it leak out. Spiritual light surged into the sky. Even though it was only for a split second, the commotion was enough to startle the surroundings. Arbor was startled and hurriedly raised her head to look. Only then did she realize that the entire sky above the meditation room had already been sealed by an aura. This layer of spiritual light simply couldn't surge out. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief and slowly sat down again. She thought to herself, so when a spiritual tool is born, a spiritual treasure's brilliance will overflow and spread in all directions. If I didn't guard against it, it would inevitably cause a commotion and the world would know. Then the spiritual tool that Mo Lien gave her before must have used some special method to seal the spiritual treasure's light. She was ignorant and inexperienced. As for the Tianji treasure map, that was because it was originally sealed by the concealed weapon box, so its divine light didn't appear in the world. However, that 9 stars mirroring the moon cauldron was rather peculiar. Arbor always felt that this medicinal cauldron wasn't that simple. This thing couldn't be a mere profound weapon. The reason why it didn't have a spiritual treasure's light was probably related to the 9 stars mirroring the moon pattern on the cauldron. So far, this cauldron only had 1 star that emitted a stream of light. Arbor sat on the praying mat, holding the dagger in her hand and carefully examining it. She saw that it was snow-white and flawless, with a layer of light silver spiritual light floating on it. It was a bit longer than the palm of her hand and was quite easy to hold. Arbor gently swiped it, only to see a strand of hair in front of her was cut off at the waist. It was truly a sharp weapon that could cut through hair and cut through iron like mud. She held it in her hand and couldn't bear to part with it as she turned it over and over again. The profound energy in her hand slightly spat out, but with a whoosh, the startled swan dagger was instantly sucked into her consciousness. Her consciousness was now in a liquefied state. When he directed his spiritual sense into it, he saw a stream that looked like a jade belt slowly flowing in his conscious. Above the stream, the Spirit Division record, the Golden Talisman Jade Tome, the Tianji treasure map, the ferrule, the wooden club, the cauldron, and other items floated quietly in the air. Now that the startled swan dagger had been sucked into his consciousness, it found an empty space on its own and stayed there quietly without any strange movements. Arbor watched for a while, then a wisp of spiritual sense quietly dispersed into his consciousness. When she came back to her senses, she lowered her head and looked at the black box on her knees. She reached in with her small hand and took out the compartment of the box. Xiao Mu took out a map drawn on parchment from it. This map should be the location of the Land of Heritage. When she unfolded the map and glanced at it, she could not help but be stunned. She was too familiar with the place drawn on the map. She didn't even need to look at the names of the places marked on the map. She could recognize the mountain range drawn on the map at a glance. At this moment, a chubby little hand gently tugged at the corner of her clothes. Arbor came back to her senses and lowered her head to look at the little monk. She saw that the little monk's round chin was slightly tilted up. A pair of clear black and white eyes stared fixedly at her as he said in a childish voice, "Benefactress, it's time to eat." Arbor reached out to stroke his little bald head, the corners of her mouth involuntarily curling up. "Call me big sister." It was a very good meal. The old monk's skill in cooking vegetarian food was really impressive. Chapter 729. After the meal, the old monk looked at Arbor as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. Arbor spoke up, "Does Great Master have something to say to me?" The old monk sighed and said, "This old monk has a presumptuous request." All these years, this old monk has been waiting for a fated person with the startled swan dagger. Now that my wish has been fulfilled, this old monk would like to leave Shadow Moon Temple and travel to the outer planets. You want to leave Seacone Planet? Arbor was slightly taken aback. The old monk nodded and said with a smile, traveling can broaden one's horizons and broaden one's mind. Arbor's gaze landed on the chubby little monk on the side. This little monk was currently looking up at them with his round chin and his round eyes. He's called Kong Kong. He's a very easy child to raise. You don't have to worry about him usually. Just give him 2 or 3 vegetarian buns every day. The old monk's heart was too big. He wanted to slip away and throw the little monk to her. That's right, she did take the startled swan dagger and map that he gifted her, but he didn't say that she had to bring a child back along with her. Arbor pursed her lips. The old monk glanced at her and quickly continued, child, if you're unwilling to take Kong Kong with you, then leave. After that old monk goes out to travel, there will be only Kong Kong left in this empty temple. Although there shouldn't be any problems with food for 2 to 3 years, leaving such a young child alone in the temple, sigh, how can this old monk bear to do that? Arbor rolled her eyes and muttered to herself, if you can't bear to, then can't you take him along with you on the road? Wouldn't it be fine if you also brought him to travel around? Kong Kong is still young after all. At this age, it's not suitable for him to go out for such a long time. The old monk seemed to have seen through Arbor's thoughts and quickly said, don't worry, this old monk will only go out for 3 years at most. After 3 years, I'll definitely come find you and bring Kong Kong back. As for Kong Kong's safety, you don't have to worry. Although he's young, he has enough strength to protect himself. Kong Kong. The old monk called out. The little monk, Kong Kong, suddenly stood up shakily from the praying mat. He shook his little butt and suddenly stretched out his 10 little round fingers. 2 balls of fire were slightly jumping on these little hands. Fire spirit. Arbor was shocked. This was the first time she had seen someone other than Mo Lien who could control fire so skillfully. The 2 flames were crimson in color and looked very bright. Compared to the red flame in Mo Lien's hand, it seemed to be even purer. Of course, it couldn't compare to Mo Lien's purple flames. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that this little brat was only 4 years old, yet he had already comprehended spiritual fire. This is the level 7 spiritual fire that Kong Kong controls. When the old monk mentioned this, his expression could not help but turn slightly strange. When he brought Kong Kong back, Kong Kong was still a baby. It seemed that he had only been born for a few days. However, it was precisely this kind of baby that was born with spiritual fire. At first, the old monk did not notice it. After he brought this baby back, the meditation room would occasionally catch fire. Later, he realized with a start that every time the baby got angry, his little bed would catch fire. The old monk coughed lightly. It's that. Kong Kong's ability to control fire is still not very good. Sometimes when he gets angry, it's easy for him to cough and cause the fire spirit to go berserk. Arbor's eyes widened. Then wouldn't this child be an unstable factor? How would she dare to send him home? Chapter 730. The old monk hurriedly added, don't worry, don't worry. Kong Kong is a very obedient child, he usually doesn't get angry. Once he gets angry, it's like a mountain flood erupting, magma spewing out. He's usually very quiet. Prepare a meditation room for him and let him chant sutras. He doesn't come out to cause trouble. The old monk said again. Arbor looked at the old monk speechlessly. She always felt that the old monk was like a shopkeeper who didn't do anything. When he saw her, he hurriedly threw the little monk, this little burden, to her. The old monk smiled and said, "Child, you definitely won't lose out by bringing Kong Kong along. You will know in the future." Although Kong Kong is still young, he has done a lot of research on Buddhist hand seals. Not only can he control the fire spirit, he can also perform various Buddhist hand seals. If you bring him along to the mystic realm, it will be of great help to you. The meaning of these words was revealed. The old monk was implying that it was useless to just rely on the map in her hands. If she wanted to enter the mystic realm, she still needed to undo the Buddhist seal. In other words, that mystic realm might have been sealed by the old monk's secret hand seals. No wonder she didn't discover it the first time she went there. The little monk staggered in front of Arbor and put his palms together to bow. "Benefactress, please take care of me in the future." Arbor's mouth twitched and lightly pressed her head on the little guy's bald head. "Call me sister." The little monk covered his bald head and looked at the little girl in front of him blankly. The old monk laughed a few times. After bidding farewell to the old monk, Arbor held the little monk's hand and walked out of the temple. She turned back to take a look. The old temple was still as solemn as before, but it lacked some incense and people. "Benefactress, the senior brothers have all gone out to travel. Now that Master is leaving, from today onwards, there will be no one in this small temple." The little monk puffed up his chubby cheeks. Arbor stretched out 2 fingers and gently pinched the little monk's soft cheeks. She corrected him with a serious face, "Call me sister." The little monk looked at her pitifully and thought, "Benefactress is so fierce." Arbor was both amused and annoyed. She raised her hand and patted his bald head. "Call me big sister, or there will be no vegetarian buns to eat." As soon as the little monk heard that he wasn't going to be given a vegetarian bun to eat, he hurriedly and obediently called out, "Elder sister." Thus, his gluttonous nature was fully revealed. "Do you eat meat?" Arbor asked, holding his little hand. The small monk shook his bald head like a rattledrum. "This little monk doesn't eat meat. The Buddha once said that if one adheres to the precepts of cleansing oneself, one should not eat meat. This little monk is from the Shadow Moon Temple and should naturally abide by my duties, strictly." "Paw!" Arbor couldn't take it anymore. He raised his hand and flicked the little monk's forehead. "Naggy." This little monk was so young, yet he had the potential to be a chatterbox. The little monk glanced at Arbor pitifully. "Benefactress, it's not good for you to keep hitting this little monk's head. First, the little monk will be stupid. Secondly, men and women should not touch each other." Arbor threw away the little monk's hand and ran off. "Go back to the Shadow Moon Temple. This child was so smart, he shouldn't starve to death." She had to harden her heart and throw this chatterbox away. The little monk saw that things were bad. His sugar daddy had actually run off. He hurriedly chased after her, shouting all the way, "Benefactress, wait for this little monk." Arbor was running happily in front. When she heard the little monk shout, she immediately slipped and almost fell to the ground. Chapter 731. An hour later. Arbor got onto the official road and flagged down a carriage. She gave the driver of the carriage the equivalent of half a liter of soybeans. She then carried the little bald child and sat on a carriage headed for Bailon City. There was still about 2 hours' journey from here to Bailon City, so Arbor didn't feel like carrying the little baldy. There were only 2 couples in the carriage, and one of the couples was also carrying a 4 to 5-year-old girl. When they saw the little monk get on the carriage, they sized him up curiously. "Amitba. Greetings, benefactors. This poor monk pays his respects." The little monk put his palms together and chanted a Buddhist proclamation. The people in the carriage looked at Arbor even more curiously. A half-grown young lady with a 4-year-old little monk. No matter how one looked at it, this combination was strange. Arbor twitched her mouth, and she pulled apart the little monk's clasped hands. The little monk pursed his small lips and looked pitifully at Arbor. Benefactress, this poor monk chased you all the way just now, and now I feel hungry. A vegetarian bun stuffed the little monk's small mouth. Eat your food. You're nagging to no end. Moreover, you're so freaking young, yet you're so scholarly, which really made people laugh. The little monk held a vegetarian bun with both hands and started nibbling on it happily. On the other hand, the little girl of the same age stared at the little monk with an impatient expression. The little monk ate halfway, but he couldn't eat any more from the little girl's stare. After thinking about it, he tilted his head, tore off a small portion of the untouched vegetarian bun, and handed it over. The couple carrying the child hurriedly thanked this compassionate little master and took the vegetarian bun to feed the little girl. Arbor didn't say much, but the couple who had fetched the vegetarian bun revealed to her that they were going to Balon City to seek refuge with their relatives. The one driving the carriage was their old father, and the other couple in the carriage was their younger brother and sister-in-law. This family had lost many siblings during their escape, and even their old mother had passed away on the road due to catching a cold. Now, the large family of more than a dozen people was left with only a family of 6. Speaking of this, they couldn't help but sigh endlessly. However, Xiao Mu only listened attentively. At least this family had a carriage that could shelter them from the wind and rain. They could be considered to be quite well off. Many people lost their entire family during their exile. This was not an exception. The closer they got to Balon City, the greater the flow of people, and the carriage also gradually slowed down. Her father, who was driving the carriage, shouted from outside, "Miss, the road ahead is blocked. Please wait for a moment." "Yeah, I'm fine," Arbor said faintly. She lifted a corner of the curtain and saw the passage outside. Sure enough, it was blocked by large and small carriages and people. He couldn't help but frown slightly as he thought to himself, if it really doesn't work, then I'll just sneak in through the night. That way, I won't have to stay outside the city to catch the wind. Benefactress, I want to pee. Arbor. He really wanted to send this little baldy flying with a slap. Not only was he nagging all the way, he also had all kinds of bad habits. But when she turned around to look, she saw that the child's fair and tender face was red. He looked at her pitifully, and her heart inexplicably softened a little. Pfft, the woman with the child couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Miss, how about I take this little master to relieve himself?" Without waiting for Arbor to express her opinion, the little baldy shook his head like a rattledrum. "No. I want Benefactress to take me there." Chapter 732. That woman then smiled and didn't say anything else. Arbor pulled the little baldy down the carriage and sized up the surroundings. However, she saw a sea of people congested on the path. Fortunately, there was a circle of underbrush that was half a person's height, which was just enough for the little monk to enter and relieve himself. In any case, the little monk was only 4 years old, so there was nothing to be ashamed of even if other people saw him. "Benefactress, you aren't going to sneak away, right?" The little monk parted a pile of underbrush and turned to look at her, his large, dark eyes staring straight at her. Arbor. Benefactress. Arbor gnashed her teeth. "Don't waste your breath and hurry up. I'll wait for you here." "Okay." The little monk finally relaxed and happily ran into the underbrush. Arbor shook her head speechlessly. Although she wasn't a good person, she wouldn't go so far as to deceive a little imp, right? She had said that she would bring him along on the journey, so how could she abandon him halfway? There were quite a few people coming and going, and when they passed by Arbor, their gazes couldn't help pausing on this little girl in snow-white clothes for a moment. This little girl was truly too good-looking. Arbor wasn't accustomed to being stared at, so she turned around. With a slight movement of her mystic conscience, she took out that jade messenger talisman from her inner world. There was actually a line of words that Imo had left behind on the jade talisman. Jojo, where are you right now? Oh, crap. She had left a message for him and then left the jade messenger talisman in her inner world without checking it. Imo should be worried to death, right? The little fellow lightly patted his head and hastily took out a talisman pen, hastily leaving a message on the jade messenger talisman. I'm outside Balon City and will enter the city soon. Don't be anxious. Just as she put down the talisman pen and put away the jade messenger talisman, she heard a shrill voice. Mother, woo-woo-woo. She saw a ball of fiery red pounce over, and in an instant, it threw itself under her ankle, hugged her leg, and began to cry. The surrounding people were immediately petrified, and they all looked in disarray at that red-clothed little Baldy who had suddenly pounced over and hugged the little girl's leg. Little Baldy's lips were red and his teeth were white, tender and cute. He looked very cute. But Arbor was shocked by this child. Where did this little brat come from? Why did he randomly grab someone and call her mother? Mother. Little Baldy slightly raised his little head, stared at the little girl, and cried, Mother, mother, mother. Xiao Mu yanked him off her lap and tossed him to the side. There was a slight movement in the bushes. Kong Kong heard the movement and ran out. The two little Baldies looked at each other. The red-robed little Baldy suddenly pointed at Kong Kong and shouted, Who are you? You actually pretended to be me and pestered my mother. Do you want to replace me and be mother's son? The passers-by were stunned. At this moment, many pairs of eyes were staring at Arbor in disbelief. Fuck, this little girl herself is not young, but her son is already so old. Now, these two bald sons are even vying for favor in public. Kong Kong was baffled. He went forward and put his palms together, bowing to the red-clothed little Baldy. This benefactor, this poor monk is a monk. Please don't speak nonsense. Afterwards, he turned back to look at the speechless Arbor. Benefactress, is this little benefactor your son? I don't know him. Arbor irritably pulled down the little monk's clasped hands. Let's go. She didn't have time to chat here. She still had to hurry into the city. Chapter 733. Mommy. Whoa. The red-clothed little Baldy was immediately like an abandoned puppy, whimpering as he threw himself at Arbor's feet and cried, Mommy, Mommy, don't leave me behind. Fuck. The Snake Beauty was truly drunk. She had originally planned to disguise herself as a little monk who was sincerely devoted to Buddhism, infiltrate the hidden moon temple, and then think of a way to approach Arbor. How could she have known that plans couldn't keep up with changes? The little guy didn't stay in the hidden moon temple for long before coming out. The Snake Beauty chased after him, and a plan came to her mind. She threw herself at Arbor in front of everyone and loudly called out, Mommy. The Snake Beauty felt that she was really going all out. At this moment, she was following Arbor with an adorable expression, crying all the way, Mommy, don't leave me behind. Arbor's head was about to explode from his shouting, and she hated that she couldn't grab a ball of mud and directly stuff his mouth with it. At this moment, a tent flap suddenly opened. When the woman saw Arbor, she was slightly startled. It was as if she hadn't expected that she would suddenly encounter an unimaginably beautiful woman in the tent district. Afterwards, she saw a red-clothed little Baldy chasing after the cold-faced woman, repeatedly calling her Mommy. A look of disdain flashed across her face. So young, yet so ignorant of self-love. So what if she was beautiful? Mississippi, her personal maid hurriedly ran out with a medicine chest. Let's wrap up early today and go back to rest. The woman reached out and brushed the hair on her temples. She swept her gaze across Arbor's face, leaving a faint light in her eyes. How could a woman who only had beauty and didn't know how to love herself compare to her? She was one of the top 50 physicians in the Celestial Medicine Valley. She was a very capable woman. Of course, the capable here wasn't referring to her cultivation, but rather her exceptional medical skills. She was very confident in the medical skills of the Celestial Medicine Valley. For a top 50 physician like her, she would definitely have exceptional strength if she went out. In terms of medical skills, there weren't many who could compare to her in the entire Balon fortifications. Mommy. The snake beauty pounced and hung onto Arbor's leg. As Xiao Mu strode forward, she felt uncomfortable from head to toe with a burden on her foot. Go away. This was ridiculous. Which family did this brat come from? Why didn't anyone come out to discipline him? Young madam, what you're doing is wrong. Although the world is tough, children are our family's treasures. How can we just abandon them? A middle-aged woman shook her head, her face full of disdain. Arbor was expressionless. Mother. The snake beauty secretly ground her teeth. Why was this stubborn child so hard to deal with? She was so hot and cute. Would it kill her to hug her? Arbor pulled away the snake beauty's small hand and stretched out his small foot, kicking her away with neither light nor heavy force. I'm not your mother. Fuck, where's your love? The snake beauty raised her head. When she met Arbor's cold gaze, she couldn't help but shiver. Fuck, it can't be. Did the little girl recognize her? Benefactress, this isn't right. Just as the little monk was about to speak, Arbor pinched his soft cheeks. Creak, at this moment, Balon City's city gate suddenly opened. 2 rows of soldiers with solemn expressions rushed out, rudely parting the crowd. A tall white figure appeared at the city gate. The young maidservant excitedly tugged at the miss of the Celestial Medicine Valley. Miss, the young sir has come to pick you up. Happy New Year, everyone. Eat, drink, and have fun. See you next year, Wax. Chapter 734. A black jade belt bound the man's black hair up high. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and it was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. His phoenix eyes were awe-inspiring without being angry. It just so happened that the sun was setting, and the sky was blanketed in red clouds. The wind was blowing and the clouds were undulating, and the chill seeped in. Mo Lien strolled out of the city gate, and he caught sight of the little fellow in a plain gown among the crowd at first glance. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared intently at the little thing. Meanwhile, when Feng Manyun heard the maidservant's words, she hastily shifted her gaze in the direction of the city gate. With this look, her maiden heart practically flew into the air. It was him, it really was him. That graceful and elegant young Master Mo. Could it be? Could it be that it was as Xiangqin said, that the young master came out this time to pick her up? Feng Manyun chuckled lightly, and her cheeks were dyed a captivating shade of red. Her elated maiden heart couldn't resist thumping, thumping, thumping faster and faster. Ever since she met this young Master Mo by chance last night, Feng Manyun's proud maiden heart, which she had carefully guarded for 18 years, couldn't help but fall for this young and handsome sir. When she discovered that this young Master Mo was also staying in the city lord's estate like her, she was overjoyed. Although the two of them hadn't interacted much since last night, after all, the young master was a jade-like gentleman, so he naturally abided by the rules in front of an unfamiliar young lady. But Feng Manyun felt that as long as she was given enough time to interact with him, this young noble sir would definitely develop a favorable impression of her. She was very confident about this. After all, a kind-hearted woman with exceptional medical skills like her was clearly rare in the current world. She was a doctor who had volunteered to go to the Shanty district to treat the civilians' injuries and heal the wounded. She was revered and worshipped by countless people in the Shanty district. At this time, sure enough, this graceful young master was walking in her direction. He was getting closer and closer, almost stopping right in front of her. Feng Manyun put on her most confident and beautiful smile as she took 2 small steps forward. She had just curtsied halfway when she murmured, "Young Master Mo." Prince Mo then drifted past her, not even sparing her a glance out of the corner of his eye. When Feng Manyun discovered that Prince Mo had directly dashed past her, the beautiful smile on her face instantly froze, as if it had been glued to her face. Feng Manyun's pitch-black pupils seemed to be whirling rapidly, and she only felt her neck turn abnormally stiff. Slowly, she turned her head around. Then, his pupils contracted and gradually enlarged. She saw that the noble young master, who had always been modest and arrogant in front of her, flew like a gust of wind in front of the cold and beautiful young lady. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the young master suddenly stretched out his arms and pulled the little girl into his embrace. She stuck close to his body and gently lifted her up. He even lifted the little girl's chin with one hand, lowered his head, and bit her lips gently. Such a willful way of doing things, as if there was no one around. Feng Manyun only felt like the sky had collapsed in front of her. How could this be? This was poles apart from the image of the noble young master in her mind. This young master didn't have the slightest bit of a gentleman style right now. He was simply a living rogue. Feng Manyun's lifeless gaze was fixed on the 2 people, as if she had been struck by lightning. Chapter 735. Emolian. Xiao Mu was caught off guard and was bitten by him, and her eyes abruptly widened. He bit her. He bit her in front of everyone. Arbor's little face was full of vigilance. This guy couldn't be thinking of beating her up, right? Why are you here? Before Xiao Mu could finish speaking, she saw the man pick her up by the waist with a cold expression and stride toward the city gate. What are you doing? Arbor moved her little hand, but he suddenly pressed it down. Arbor keenly sensed that the man was very angry. Yes, he looked very, very angry. But why? Our dear Xiao Mu lowered her little head and racked her brains, but she couldn't figure it out. Logically speaking, she should have been very obedient and sent him a message. What reason did this guy have to be angry? Humph. Moreover, they had only not seen each other for 2 nights. It wasn't like she wanted to fall into the crevice. If there was someone to blame, it could only be the underground village chief's fault. Benefactress. When the little monk saw that his patron was actually carried away by a fierce and domineering man, how could he tolerate it? He hurriedly took small steps and ran over to their side. Benefactress, what you're doing is wrong. Hurry and let go of my benefactress. Don't act recklessly. The little monk raised his round little chin and stretched out 2 chubby little fingers, pointing forcefully at Emolian, who was much taller than him. His appearance was so adorable that the surrounding people broke out into laughter. Emolian's eyes darkened, and she muttered to the little monk, "Your benefactress." That's right. The little monk didn't know that he was about to die. He still stretched out 2 fingers and raised them towards the sky, pointing them at Emolian. Hurry and let go of my benefactress. Let this little monk tell you, karma exists in this world. We should have a clear conscience when dealing with people, and we can't force anyone. You have to know that the cycle of karma is not about to end, it's just that it's not time yet. Emolian cast an indifferent glance at him. Huifeng coughed softly and immediately flew to the little monk like a whirlwind. Before the little monk could finish chanting, he picked him up and grabbed him in his hand. Let go, let go. The little monk shouted. There was no anger in his voice, but he still stretched out two fat fingers and muttered cutely, "How can you use violence and power? This method was wrong. Quickly let go. Benefactor, turn back and be saved. Don't make a single mistake that will lead to a series of mistakes. When the time comes, there will be no turning back." The corner of Huifeng's mouth twitched. Under Prince Mo's gaze, he tore off a corner of his robe and directly stuffed the little monk's mouth. Where did this little brat come from? He was so small, yet he was able to preach clearly and logically. Yes, the world was finally peaceful again. Even Arbor felt that it was a good idea to stuff the little monk's mouth. Otherwise, it would be too noisy. Mo Lien didn't say anything else and directly turned around to leave with Arbor in her arms. However, she hadn't taken a few steps when Feng Manyun, who had plucked up her courage, stopped her. Young Master Mo, Feng Manyun gave Mo Lien a standard ladylike curtsy before looking up. Her watery eyes gazed deeply at Mo Lien. Young Master Mo, you have been deceived by this woman. She isn't a young lady from a good family at all. Everyone here saw it just now. She has a son. Feng Manyun abruptly pointed at Arbor with widened eyes. She's so young, yet she's already fooling around with people everywhere. She even shamelessly had illicit sexual relations with others and gave birth to a son. Chapter 736. And what was with the son? Mo Lien simply didn't notice the snake beauty's appearance at all. That was to be expected. As a crafty person like the snake beauty, when she saw Mo Lien appear, she was very clear that she had already lost the best opportunity to stick to the little lady. She had to leave quickly. Moreover, the little lady's stern gaze just now might have actually meant that she had long seen through her identity as the snake beauty. But was that possible? This wasn't some simple disguise technique. This was a very rare special ability. She was probably the only person in the entire Seacombe planet who could shift one's appearance, alter one's bones, and distort one's meridians. This special ability to change a person's bones, appearance, and even meridians wasn't something that other cats or dogs could possess. Her red-clothed little Baldy's appearance was worlds apart from the Iron Walk brat from before, be it in terms of appearance or figure. If this little girl was able to recognize her at a glance, then there was really no justice in this world. Mo Lien lowered her head to glance at the little lady and saw that the little lady was currently staring at Feng Manyun. Feng Manyun felt uncomfortable all over from the little lady's gaze. The little lady's watery eyes were like two icy pools, and when she stared at someone, it made them feel very oppressed. Who did you say had a son with someone? Miss Chiao was an especially sensitive person. She could discern that the young lady before her clearly harbored a very strong enmity towards her with a single glance. Feng Manyun forcefully suppressed the anger in her heart as she gazed coldly at Arbor and said, "Could it not be? Just now, there was a bald child in red." Feng Manyun turned around, but her pupils suddenly contracted. Where was that child? Where did that damn little Baldy in red run off to? Just now, there was clearly a little Baldy in red who kept calling you Mom. Granny. Arbor suddenly called out, interrupting Feng Manyun's words. What? Feng Manyun's gaze suddenly froze as she stared at the little lady in front of her in disbelief. Although her face wasn't as rosy and exquisite as the little lady's, and she was also slightly older than the little lady, she was still a charming 18-year-old young lady in the end. If it weren't for the contrast of the little lady in front of her, Feng Manyun would also be a great beauty that everyone praised. But now, just listen to what this wretched lass called me. Granny. 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 Arbor didn't even raise his head, merely raising his eyebrows coldly. Without waiting for the infuriated Feng Manyun to retort, he continued to say with a stoic face, "Could it be that you really are my granny if I call you granny? I'll only be 15 after the new year. That little brat looks like he's 5 or 6 years old. You've all seen it." Arbor said expressionlessly, "Do you think I could have given birth to such a big son 5 or 6 years ago?" Ha! Arbor's lips curled up in mockery as he cast Feng Manyun a disdainful glance from the corner of his eyes. "You still claim to be a doctor. Isn't such a simple medical theory something that can be discerned at a glance?" "Doctor, ha." The two consecutive ha-s caused Feng Manyun's charming face to swell with a myriad of colors, turning it into a purplish-red hue. "You!" Feng Manyun was rendered speechless by Arbor's rebuke. She wanted to say something, but she was tongue-tied and couldn't retort. "You scolded me very viciously just now. Apologize to me immediately. Otherwise, I'll make sure that you won't be able to utter another word from now on," Arbor said apathetically. The relatives at home hadn't left yet. "Speaking of which, your family is also kicking up a fuss, right? Ha ha ha." Chapter 737. In reality, ever since her rebirth, Arbor had been consciously or unconsciously recuperating her body. Her period started around the age of 13 in her previous life, so it was indeed late in this life. However, she had checked her pulse before, and her body was much better than in her previous life, so she wasn't too worried. According to her calculations, it should be within the next 2 months. That was why Feng Manyun's insults towards her just now were truly extremely laughable. Feng Manyun's face flushed red from embarrassment, and she stammered, You. This damn lass actually wanted her to apologize to her in public. Impossible. Feng Manyun's face flushed so red that it was about to flush blood. Just now was merely a misunderstanding. I misunderstood Mississippi. Feng Manyun's lips trembled, and she couldn't resist speaking softly. What misunderstanding? Could it be that you're this kind of person? That you go around fooling around and casually having a son with someone else? Arbor coldly interrupted her, throwing Feng Manyun's previous words back at her. After all, if your body is dirty, everyone you look at is dirty. From the looks of it, you've given birth to more than one, right? Everyone. This little lady's mouth was truly venomous. Others said that she had given birth to a son, yet she wanted to accuse others of giving birth to several sons. Look at how Physician Feng was so infuriated that her face flushed red, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She really was pitiful. Arbor scoffed and turned his small face away, no longer looking at Feng Manyun. They simply weren't on the same level of fighting strength, so he didn't want to waste his breath on her. You're already shedding tears after saying a few words. What use are tears? Can they be eaten or drunk? Young Master Mo, this miss is babbling nonsense. Don't listen to her. Before Feng Manyun could finish speaking while wiping her tears, Mo Lien directly strode past her with Arbor in her arms, not even sparing her a glance out of the corner of her eye. Feng Manyun's entire body stiffened. He actually didn't even want to waste time listening to her explanation. It turned out that this humble noble young master only showed his rascal side in front of that little girl. He completely turned a blind eye to everyone else. It wasn't that young master who maintained the etiquette of a gentleman and maintained his poise and distance from unfamiliar girls. Instead, this young master simply couldn't be bothered to pay attention to a strange girl. His coldness that kept people 1,000 miles away came from the depths of his bones. Arrogance, indifference, and gentlemanly manners, these were the views of this noble young master in the eyes of the other ladies. In fact, he wasn't even that kind of person. She hasn't apologized to me. Arbor angrily pulled Mo Lien's hair. From the beginning until now, Mo Lien hadn't spoken to her. The little girl was unhappy. In front of Prince Mo, darling Qiao had always been like a little emperor. When Mo Lien ignored her, she was a little angry. Apologize. Mo Lien abruptly turned around, and he abruptly glared at Feng Manyun with a bone-chilling severity. Feng Manyun's entire heart started trembling fiercely. This was the first time Prince Mo had spoken to Feng Manyun since they met yesterday. Yet these two words made Miss Feng feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Feng Manyun's body started trembling involuntarily. She stubbornly pressed her tongue against her teeth, unwilling to utter a single word. Bang! An intense pressure forced her knees to give way, and she abruptly knelt on the ground. Chapter 738. Ah! Feng Manyun only felt that pressure crushing her from head to toe, and her bones were about to shatter. How could she resist it? Saliva and snot flowed out of her nose and mouth. She only felt that she was battered and exhausted in front of everyone, and her image as a fairy physician from Celestial Medicine Valley didn't exist at all. No! How could she kneel in front of that girl in such a lowly and contemptible manner? Her neck was nearly crushed, and she heavily knocked her head against the ground, unable to lift it up at all. He actually treated her like this. Intense hatred welled up in Feng Manyun's heart. At this moment, the tender feelings of a young girl that filled her heart all transformed into bone-deep hatred. Hate, hate, hate. Hate. This icily arrogant and heartless man actually trampled on her, Feng Manyun's, feelings like this. Right now, she couldn't tell if she was feeling regret or resentment, or perhaps it was even more hatred. If she didn't take revenge, she wasn't a gentleman. She would definitely avenge this grudge. Arbor tugged at Mo Lien's sleeve and puffed up her cheeks. She just didn't like that woman scolding her like this and wanted that woman to apologize for her tongue. She wouldn't go so far as to insist on killing her over a few words. Her original intention was only to have Feng Manyun apologize. Shouldn't she apologize for using malicious and untrue words to scold someone in front of them? She kept feeling that this man had nowhere to vent his anger and just so happened to bump into the unlucky Feng Manyun herself. Speaking of which, although Prince Mo always looked gentle and amiable, giving off a refreshing feeling, he was actually more ruthless and decisive than anyone else in the world. Mo Lien pressed her lips tightly together, and her face was as cold as snow. Her pair of phoenix eyes were dyed with ruthlessness, and she raised her hand apathetically. Your Highness. Your Highness. Bailon City's city lord, Lin Yongyi, who had rushed over after hearing the news, hastily stepped forward and knelt on one knee in salute. Your Highness, please quell your anger. Your Highness, please show mercy. Lin Yongyi's eyes contracted slightly. As a leveled, 13 mystic cultivator, City Lord Lin could see more clearly than anyone else present that His Highness's move clearly carried killing intent. His Highness wanted to execute this Miss Feng on the spot. What should they do? Miss Feng came from the Celestial Medical Valley. Even if he didn't give face to the monk, he still had to give face to the Buddha. The Celestial Medicine Valley had always lived in seclusion and never asked about worldly affairs. The people in the Celestial Medicine Valley would often come out to travel around and treat people. They had indeed treated many people who were on the verge of death and saved many people's lives. It was definitely an excellent sect that was praised by tens of thousands of people and praised by everyone. If His Highness rashly killed a doctor from the Celestial Medicine Valley, not to mention whether he would become enemies with the Celestial Medicine Valley, even if it was for the sake of his reputation, he absolutely couldn't do it on the surface. His capricious Highness really made all the officials worry about him. Your Highness, Your Highness. Miss Feng made a mistake and should naturally be handed over to the people of the Celestial Medicine Valley to deal with. Your Highness, please. Slowly withdrawing the pressure all over her body, Mo Lien coldly glanced at City Lord Lin, turned around, picked up the little fellow, and floated away. Woo woo. Og. The little monk kicked his two little legs and angrily glared at Huifeng, who was carrying him. With a tap of his foot, Huifeng picked up the little monk and swiftly followed after the crown prince and his wife. Ha, ha. Cough cough, ha. Feng Manyan's entire body went limp, and she sprawled on the ground like a dead dog, shuddering all over. The maidservant Xiangqin hastily helped her up with tears in her eyes. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.